My name is Verity Miller, and I'm 28 years old. 7 days ago, I sat at my family custom mahogany dining table while my father raised a crystal glass of imported Bordeaux. 12 of our wealthiest Somerset County neighbors sat around us, wearing designer clothes and expectant smiles. The room smelled of catered roasted lamb and expensive perfume. The crystal chandelier above us cast a warm golden light over the silver cutlery and the pristine white table linens. My father, Richard, looked right at me from the head of the table. The conversation had lulled, and every eye in the room was fixed on my face. "Verity, your brother needs $50,000 in seed capital for his new startup," my father announced. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, pinning me under the crushing weight of New Jersey high society expectations. This family has always supported its own. It is time you learned the value of contributing to our legacy. I want you to write him a check tonight. My older brother Kevin sat across from me, twirling a silver fork. He flashed a smug, entitled smirk, taking a slow sip of his wine as he watched me get boxed in. He was the golden boy, the family favorite, who had never paid a dime of rent in his life. Now he wanted my hard-earned savings to play businessman. In our neighborhood, you do not air your dirty laundry, and you certainly do not deny your family in front of the country club president who was seated just 3 chairs down from me. My father expected me to lower my head, feel the shame, and write the check. He wanted to look like a powerful patriarch, commanding his successful offspring to share the wealth. He thrived on the image of the benevolent provider, steering his family to greatness. I am a certified public accountant. I build financial models for a living. I know when numbers add up, and I know when people are lying. My father thought he was executing a flawless power play. He did not know my laptop was open on the table right in front of me. He did not know my finger was hovering over the Enter key, ready to project a financial spreadsheet onto the dining room wall. A spreadsheet that would expose every lie, every stolen dollar, and every hidden debt. A spreadsheet that would reduce his carefully crafted life to ashes. Before I tell you what was on that spreadsheet and how it destroyed my father's fragile facade, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Luke Vengeance, but only if you genuinely enjoy a story about hard truth and satisfying justice. And while you are here, drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I love knowing who is tuning in to hear these stories. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the family meeting that lit the match. Somerset County, New Jersey is a place where your zip code is a weapon. The property taxes here could fund a comfortable retirement in almost any other state. But the residents wear that financial strain like a badge of honor. It proves you belong among the elite. Growing up here, you learn early that perception is the only currency that truly matters. My father spent his entire adult life making sure our family looked like old money. He wore crisp golf polos, drove a polished sedan, and complained about the Homeowners Association fees like it was a competitive sport. My mother, Cynthia, treated our sprawling colonial home like a museum. She spent her days curating every throw pillow and demanding perfection from the baseboards to the imported chandeliers. The culture here is obsessed with elite education and prestige. If you do not have a bumper sticker from a top-tier university on your luxury car, you might as well be invisible. That environment perfectly amplified my parents' toxic favoritism. They treated my older brother Kevin like royalty, simply for existing. But that is a conflict for another day. Right now, you need to know about the rent. On a humid Tuesday evening, my father summoned me to the living room for what he called a formal family discussion. I walked in and sat on the edge of a floral armchair, holding a chipped promotional mug from my college orientation. It was filled with lukewarm tap water. Across from me, my parents shared the pristine white leather sofa. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Verity, we need to discuss household economics," he said. His tone was practiced, carrying the unearned authority of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. Inflation is hitting everyone hard right now. The cost of maintaining a property of this caliber is climbing every single quarter. The landscaping, the maintenance, the roof repairs. It is a tight ship, and we all need to row. I looked past him through the large bay window. Two men in neon green vests were methodically trimming the hedges lining our circular driveway. I knew exactly what that pristine yard cost. $600 a month, paid promptly to ensure the neighbors never saw a stray weed. I am a senior data analyst and a certified public accountant. I spend 60 hours a week auditing corporate ledgers, finding hidden assets, and balancing complex portfolios. Numbers are my native language. I took a sip of my metallic-tasting tap water and waited for the punchline. Effective the 1st of next month, your rent is increasing by 30%, my father said, his gaze locking onto mine. It is a necessary adjustment to keep the house running smoothly. 30%. I let the number hang in the quiet room. Before I could respond, my mother reached out and adjusted a stack of glossy architectural magazines on the glass coffee table, ensuring their spines were perfectly aligned. "Do not look at us like that, Verity," she said, her voice adopting a gentle scolding tone. "Your father works tirelessly to provide this beautiful environment for us. You have a good job now. It is only fair you pull your weight. You would not want the neighbors to think we were struggling to make ends meet." There it was, the core philosophy of the Miller household laid bare. The perception of wealth held vastly more importance than the reality of it. It did not matter if I was drained dry, as long as the driveway looked immaculate and the neighbors remained envious. I did the math in my head. A 30% increase pushed my monthly contribution past the cost of a luxury one-bedroom apartment in Hoboken. I could afford to leave. I could pack my bags, drive away, and rent a beautiful place all my own. But I could not do that. I was tied to this house in a way they did not comprehend. My financial health was chained to their choices. My father watched me closely. He wanted a debate. He wanted me to complain about the unfairness of the hike so he could deliver a prepared lecture on the harsh realities of the real estate market. He loved teaching me lessons about the value of a dollar and the sacrifices required to maintain our social standing. He thrives on feeling superior. "All right," I said quietly. Richard blinked. He was visibly thrown by my total lack of resistance. He had braced for an argument, and my calm acceptance derailed his train of thought. He recovered a second later, leaning back into the sofa with a highly satisfied smile. "Good," he nodded. "I am glad we can handle this like adults. It is time you learned how the real world operates, Verity. Nothing comes free." "I will update the automatic bank transfer tomorrow morning," I replied, setting my mug on a cork coaster. I stood up and walked the carpeted stairs to my childhood bedroom. The walls were the same pale yellow they had been since I was 12 years old. I closed the door until it clicked, shutting out the faint hum of the central air conditioning. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. I did not argue with my father because there was no point in arguing with a lie. He called it rent. He framed it as a vital contribution to our survival in this affluent neighborhood. He thought he was extorting a naive daughter, teaching her a tough lesson while padding his own pockets. What he did not know was that I already knew the truth about our finances. I knew the foundation of his suburban kingdom was built on a mountain of hidden debt. He thought he held all the power in the house, but as I stared at the banking portal on my screen, I smiled. I knew something he did not. I knew exactly who really owned the roof over his head. I was still sitting on the edge of the floral armchair processing my father's 30% rent increase when the heavy mahogany front door swung open. The solid wood slammed shut with enough force to rattle the framed family portraits lining the hallway wall. A booming, confident laugh echoed into the living room, followed immediately by my mother's delighted gasp. Kevin had arrived. My older brother is 32 years old and possesses a polished, effortless charm that buys an endless supply of forgiveness from everyone he meets. While I spent my early 20s barricaded inside the university library, grinding through advanced taxation and corporate auditing courses to pass my licensing exams on the first try, Kevin took 6 leisurely years to finish a generic communications degree. He never officially moved out of our childhood home. Instead, he occupies the massive primary guest suite situated directly over the 3-car garage. He pays 0 rent. He buys 0 groceries. He has never once been asked to contribute a single dollar to the property taxes or the climbing utility bills. My mother still meticulously irons his linen collars every Sunday evening because she insists the local dry cleaner uses far too much starch for his supposedly sensitive skin. In the twisted mythology of the Miller household, Kevin is the brilliant visionary waiting for his inevitable big break. I am simply the human calculator expected to quietly fund the background operations. "Verity, get out here," my father called out, his voice carrying a rare note of unbridled excitement. "You need to see what your brother just brought home." I set my chipped promotional mug down on the cork coaster and walked toward the grand foyer. My parents were already standing on the front porch, practically vibrating with pride. The humid evening air washed over me as I stepped outside and followed their gaze toward the circular driveway. Parked directly under the warm glow of the carriage lights was a brand new charcoal gray luxury SUV. The iconic Bavarian automotive emblem gleamed brightly on the hood. The temporary dealer tags were still bolted to the rear bumper, and the sharp, distinct scent of fresh leather and premium wax cut straight through the earthy smell of the landscaping mulch. In our specific zip code, a vehicle like that serves as far more than mere transportation. It functions as a highly calibrated social statement. It tells the wealthy neighbors you have officially arrived and intend to stay. My father walked down the brick pathway and slapped Kevin squarely on the back, a physical gesture of pure masculine validation. "I am incredibly proud of you, son," Richard declared, stepping back to admire the sleek, aggressive lines of the expensive machine. "A man has to look the part to get the part. You cannot show up to venture capital pitch meetings driving a worn-out sedan. This purchase shows real entrepreneurial spirit." My mother hovered near the passenger side, gingerly tracing her manicured fingers along the pristine paint job. "Your new investors are going to be so impressed by this," Kevin cooed, turning to flash a bright smile at him. "It is a brilliant investment in your personal brand." I stood on the porch feeling a cold, hard knot pull tight in my stomach. Kevin had bounced between half-baked startup ideas for the better part of a decade. He referred to himself as an independent consultant, but spent the vast majority of his weekday afternoons playing 18 holes of golf or networking at upscale hotel bars. He had 0 verifiable income. He did not possess a single client. "You leased a $90,000 vehicle?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely deadpan. Kevin leaned casually against the driver's side door, crossing his arms over his chest. He wore a designer linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to project an aura of casual success. "It is not just a vehicle, Verity," he corrected me, flashing that blinding, rehearsed smile he used to charm waitresses and bank tellers. "It is a strategic business asset. The monthly lease payments are a total tax write-off. You are the certified public accountant, so you should know exactly how that works." "That is not how write-offs function," I said flatly, my professional training overriding my desire to stay quiet. "You actually need a profitable operating business generating taxable revenue before you can deduct a business expense. Otherwise, you just signed up for a $1,200 monthly liability that you cannot afford." The joyful, celebratory atmosphere on the driveway instantly evaporated. The air grew thick and tense. My father shot me a dark warning glare, his jaw clenching. "Stop being so negative," Richard snapped, his tone shifting abruptly from a proud patriarch to a stern disciplinarian. "Your brother is taking calculated risks to build a lucrative future. You sit safely in a corporate cubicle and play it safe all day long. Do not project your own lack of ambition onto him just because you do not understand the mindset of a founder." Kevin chuckled softly, shaking his head as if he deeply pitied me. "Dad told me you were giving him a hard time inside about the rent adjustment," he said, tossing his gaze toward the colonial house. "You really need to loosen your grip on your wallet, Verity. If you worked a little harder at your little numbers job and took some actual risks out in the real world, you would not be sweating a few hundred extra bucks a month to help out the family. It is called stepping up." The sheer, unmatched audacity of his comment stole the breath straight from my lungs. I was working grueling 60-hour weeks, managing complex corporate portfolios to build a solid financial foundation. I was the one ensuring the lights stayed on. He was playing pretend executive in our parents' driveway with borrowed money. Yet in their eyes, I was the ungrateful burden, and he was the conquering hero returning from battle. My mother sighed loudly, breaking the heavy tension before I could formulate a response. "Let us go inside and celebrate properly," she suggested, looping her arm affectionately through my brother's elbow. "I bought a chilled bottle of imported champagne earlier today, just in case we received some good news." We migrated back into the house, heading straight toward the kitchen. The center of our culinary space is dominated by an imported dark granite island. My mother polished that stone surface twice a day without fail. It served as the flawless centerpiece of her perfect suburban sanctuary. Kevin walked up to the edge of the island and pulled the heavy silver key fob from his tailored pants pocket. He spun the metal ring around his index finger once before casually tossing it onto the counter. The heavy, jagged metal hit the polished stone with a sharp, ugly clack. The keys slid forward under their own momentum, gouging a small, distinct white scratch straight into the pristine, dark surface. I stared down at the permanent mark. It was just a tiny physical imperfection, but it spoke volumes about our entire existence. Kevin could walk into a room, casually damage the foundational core of the house, and face zero consequences. He broke things and expected the rest of us to sweep up the shards. My mother clearly saw the scratch. I watched her eyes drop directly to the damaged stone. For a fraction of a second, her warm smile faltered, and her shoulders stiffened. But then, she deliberately looked away, pretending the blemish did not exist. She reached into the glass front refrigerator to retrieve the champagne bottle, actively choosing the comfortable illusion of perfection over confronting her son's careless destruction. "I need to get back to work," I announced, turning away from the kitchen before she could offer me a glass. "Do not stay up too late crunching those numbers," Kevin called out, his voice trailing me as I walked toward the front stairs. "Some of us actually have big, important meetings in the morning and need our beauty sleep." I climbed the wooden stairs back to my bedroom, the sound of a popping cork and clinking crystal echoing from the floor below. The anger burning in my chest was no longer a frantic, emotional flame. It had crystallized into something cold, highly focused, and exceptionally dangerous. They thought they had me perfectly contained. My father believed his firm lecture on inflation had successfully secured a hefty increase in my monthly payments. Kevin believed those exact payments would seamlessly subsidize his fake executive lifestyle while he lived rent-free. They both sincerely believed I was just a quiet, compliant girl who would fund their delusions indefinitely just to keep the peace. I walked back to my desk and sat down in front of my glowing laptop screen. They told me to focus on my numbers, so that is exactly what I was going to do. I closed my personal checking account tab and opened a different, highly secure banking portal. I typed in a complex alphanumeric password and authenticated the login with a biometric scan on my phone. The screen loaded, revealing the raw, hidden truth they were so desperate to ignore. The undeniable truth that made my father's strict demand for rent a literal federal crime. I was about to look at the real household ledger, and the story those numbers told was going to tear this family apart from the inside out. The glow of the laptop screen cast a pale blue light across my childhood bedroom. Downstairs, I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of celebration. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low rumble of my father's laughter drifted up through the floorboards. They were toasting to my brother's imaginary success. They were celebrating a luxury vehicle parked in our driveway while I sat upstairs staring at the brutal, unforgiving reality of our financial existence. My fingers rested on the keyboard. I am a certified public accountant. My entire professional career is built on the fundamental principle that numbers do not possess the capacity to lie. People fabricate stories. People construct elaborate social facades to impress their wealthy neighbors. But ledgers always tell the cold, objective truth. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop and navigated to the master spreadsheet I had maintained for almost a decade. To understand the depth of my father's deception, you have to travel back 8 years. I was 20 years old and still in the middle of my undergraduate studies. The nation was experiencing a sharp economic downturn, and my father's boutique logistics consulting firm took a catastrophic hit. Clients vanished. Contracts evaporated overnight. But Richard Miller was a proud Somerset County patriarch. He refused to downsize. He refused to sell the sprawling colonial home and move his family into a modest townhouse. He preferred to drown in debt rather than face the perceived humiliation of admitting financial defeat to the country club members. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings when I was a junior in college. I remember the evening I found the final default notice crumpled in the kitchen trash can. My father was sitting in his dark home office, weeping quietly into his hands. His fragile ego was shattered. The illusion of his prosperity was collapsing. I possessed a pristine credit score, built from years of meticulous saving and working part-time jobs. I also had a guaranteed job offer from a top-tier accounting firm waiting for me upon graduation. I stepped in and saved him. I drove him to the regional bank branch and co-signed the comprehensive refinancing agreement. I attached my name, my pristine credit, and my future earning potential to the towering debt of this property. From that day forward, I became the sole financial pillar holding this family upright. I assumed direct responsibility for the primary mortgage. Every single month, a substantial portion of my paycheck is routed directly to the lending institution to cover the principal and the interest. I am the reason the bank has not seized the property. I own the equity. I hold the true power. But my father could not stomach that reality. His fragile masculine pride could not handle the fact that his college-aged daughter was the literal owner of the roof over his head. So he constructed a convenient fiction. He told my brother and my mother that I was simply paying rent to live in my childhood bedroom. He framed my presence as a burden. He was generously accommodating. To me, however, he presented a different narrative. The mortgage payment alone was not enough to maintain the estate he claimed. New Jersey is notorious for levying some of the highest municipal property taxes in the country. Our local township charged astronomical sums to fund the elite public schools and the manicured local parks. My father told me my monthly rent was my mandatory contribution to the municipal tax burden and the strict homeowners association fees. I transferred that specific amount into his primary checking account on the first of every month, trusting him to remit those funds to the local government. Tonight, his demand for a 30% increase in that tax contribution felt wrong. It defied logical accounting principles. Municipal levies do not surge by 30% overnight. I opened the digital ledger linked to his primary checking account. As a co-signer on the original refinancing, I retained legal access to view the joint financial traffic. I had avoided looking closely at his spending habits for years, out of a misplaced sense of filial respect. That blind trust ended tonight. I initiated a custom audit running a basic search query for any outgoing payments addressed to the Somerset County tax assessor. The search returned 0 results for the past 36 months. A cold chill cascaded down my spine. I expanded the search parameters, looking for the homeowners association payments. 0 results. I sat perfectly still, listening to the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. The money I transferred to him every month, the funds specifically earmarked to protect our home from government seizure, were not going toward the property. He was stealing my tax contributions. I dragged my cursor down the chronological list of his recent expenditures. The digital flow of money painted a horrifying portrait of vanity and pure selfishness. I saw constant, steady drains on the account, hundreds of dollars spent at upscale steakhouses, recurring monthly membership dues for the Oak Ridge Country Club, premium wine deliveries. Then my eyes locked onto a specific transaction, and my heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. It was a debit charge for $600 processed at a high-end golf pro shop. I cross-referenced the exact date of the transaction, September 14th. A vivid memory struck me with the force of a physical blow. I remembered September 14th with painful clarity. I was balancing a razor-thin budget that week because our homeowner insurance premium had spiked unexpectedly. I had exactly $12 left in my personal checking account after paying the primary mortgage. I stood in the aisle of a discount grocery store, looking at fresh vegetables, and realized I could not afford them. I skipped buying groceries that week. I ate plain boiled rice and drank tap water for 5 consecutive days to ensure the bank draft cleared and my family kept their home. On that exact same day, while I was skipping meals to save his house, my father used my hard-earned tax contribution to buy a new titanium golf driver. My vision blurred with hot tears of profound betrayal. I blinked them away, forcing my analytical mind back to the glowing spreadsheet. I scrolled further up the digital ledger, checking the transactions from earlier this afternoon. I found a wire transfer for $4,000, sent directly to a luxury automotive dealership. It was the exact amount required for the down payment on the charcoal gray SUV currently sitting in our driveway. My father had used my stolen tax money to lease a vanity vehicle for my unemployed brother. He extorted me under the guise of municipal duty and used the cash to buy Kevin's affection. The paradigm of my entire existence shifted in that quiet bedroom. I was not a helpless victim suffering under the strict rules of a demanding patriarch. I was the silent, heavily burdened financial titan holding the entire facade together. My father was nothing but a parasitic tenant wearing expensive clothes and playing golf with stolen funds. The dramatic irony of the situation tasted like ash in my mouth. He had just threatened to increase the rent on the woman who literally owned the deed to his life. But the realization brought a new, terrifying question to the forefront of my mind. If my father was spending my tax contributions on luxury cars and country club dues, then who was paying the county tax assessor? The answer was nobody. In the state of New Jersey, unpaid property taxes do not just disappear. The municipality places a rigid, unyielding lien on the physical estate. If the deficit remains unresolved, the local government will eventually seize the house and auction it off to the highest bidder to recover their lost revenue. If that happened, the ensuing bankruptcy would be permanently attached to my name. My pristine credit score would be annihilated. My professional license as a certified public accountant would be subject to immediate review and potential revocation. My father was not just stealing my money. His vanity was pushing me toward the edge of total professional and financial destruction. I needed to know exactly how much danger I was in. I needed to see the physical notices from the township. I closed the laptop and stood up from my desk. The digital records were damning, but I required the official government documents to understand the full scope of his negligence. I knew my father kept all crucial correspondence locked away in his mahogany-paneled home office at the end of the hallway. He always kept the lower right drawer of his heavy wooden desk secured with a small brass key. The celebration downstairs was growing louder. Kevin was likely pouring another glass of imported champagne, while my parents admired his empty accomplishments. They were thoroughly distracted. It was the perfect opportunity to find the physical evidence of their impending ruin. I stepped out of my bedroom and walked silently down the carpeted corridor toward my father's sanctuary. The ambient noise from the kitchen downstairs masked my footsteps. My father always demanded strict reverence for his personal workspace. The home office at the end of the hall was his private sanctuary. A solid oak door separated his domain from the rest of the house. I turned the brass knob and slipped inside, pushing the heavy door shut behind me. The room smelled of expensive leather bindings and citrus aftershave. Tall, pristine bookshelves lined the walls, filled with hardback biographies of famous historical leaders he had never actually read. His dark mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, angled perfectly to face the door, like a corporate command center. I needed a plausible alibi just in case someone walked in and caught me snooping. I rehearsed the lie in my head. I was looking for a misplaced W-2 tax form from 3 years ago because human resources at my accounting firm requested it for a routine background audit. It was a boring, mundane excuse. Boring excuses are always the most believable because nobody wants to ask follow-up questions about old tax forms. But my pulse drummed a fast, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew what I was really hunting for, and a missing W-2 form was not going to explain the missing thousands of dollars. I moved behind the desk and began opening the unlocked upper drawers. They contained exactly what you would expect from a man obsessed with appearances. Customized stationery embossed with his initials, expensive imported fountain pens, leather-bound planners filled with golf tee times and lunch reservations, rather than actual business meetings. But the lower right drawer refused to budge. The metal lock held firm, resisting my pull. My father projected an image of a sophisticated strategist, but his daily habits were painfully predictable. He viewed himself as a master of security, but lacked the creativity to actually hide anything well. I turned toward the bookcase, situated directly behind his desk. On the third shelf sat a silver-plated golf trophy he won at a charity scramble 5 years ago. I reached up, lifted the hollow metal cup, and retrieved the small brass key taped underneath the dark wooden base. He had used the exact same hiding spot since I was a teenager in high school. I slid the key into the lock on the lower right drawer. It turned with a sharp, definitive click. I pulled the heavy wooden drawer open, expecting to find neatly organized ledgers or hidden bank statements. There were no organized file folders inside. There were no neatly labeled dividers. Instead, the enclosed space was crammed with a thick, chaotic stack of unopened mail. But it was not normal, everyday correspondence. Every single piece of mail in that drawer shared the same terrifying visual profile. They were thick, rectangular envelopes printed on heavy, premium stock paper, and they were all stamped with bright, urgent red ink. I reached down and picked up the top envelope. The thick, embossed texture of the government warning paper felt rough against my fingertips. The official seal of the state of New Jersey pressed deeply into the top left corner. That rough, tactile sensation sent a shockwave of pure adrenaline straight into my nervous system. These were not generic utility bills or targeted credit card offers. These were official municipal tax delinquency notices. I tore open the top envelope. My eyes scanned the harsh, capitalized letters printed across the page. It was a formal declaration from the Somerset County tax assessor. The document outlined a staggering financial deficit. I grabbed a handful of the older envelopes from the bottom of the stack and ripped them open, one by one, lining the papers up across the pristine mahogany desk. The chronological timeline laid out before me was a masterpiece of financial neglect. The first notice was dated 3 years ago. It featured a polite reminder of missed property tax installments. The next few notices escalated in tone, adding late fees and minor municipal penalties. Then the language shifted, from polite reminders to stern legal threats. By the time I reached the most recent document, dated just 14 days ago, the total outstanding balance had snowballed into a life-ruining sum. 36 months of unpaid property taxes, combined with compounding interest and severe township penalties. The local government was no longer asking for payment. The final red document was a formal notice of intent to place a municipal tax lien on the property. The air in the office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I braced my hands against the smooth edge of the desk, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The stakes had just multiplied beyond a simple family dispute over stolen rent money. This was an impending legal catastrophe. In our state, a tax lien is a merciless weapon. Once the county attaches a lien to the property deed, they possess the legal authority to auction the estate to the highest bidder to recover their lost revenue. The homeowner loses all rights. The house is seized and liquidated without hesitation. But the danger did not stop at the property line. The primary mortgage, the towering loan I had co-signed 8 years ago to save my weeping father from ruin, contained a strict acceleration clause. If a municipal lien is placed on the house, it triggers an automatic default on the primary mortgage. The lending institution would immediately call the entire loan due in full. When the loan defaulted, the bank would come after the primary signers. They would come after me. A deep, primal fear wrapped tight around my throat. To the outside world, I was a highly successful 28-year-old professional. Securing a certified public accountant license is a grueling multi-year ordeal. The state board requires candidates to pass 4 grueling examinations, verify thousands of hours of field experience, and undergo a strict, rigorous background check. The board actively monitors our financial health to ensure we possess the ethical standing required to manage corporate wealth. A public tax foreclosure and a subsequent mortgage default would be professional suicide. The ensuing bankruptcy would permanently stain my record. The state accounting board would initiate an immediate review process. I would lose my hard-earned license. I would lose my prestigious position at the firm. Everything I had built through years of late-night studying and endless overtime would be wiped out because my father needed to buy titanium golf clubs and lease a luxury vehicle for his favorite child. He was using my stolen tax contributions to fund a fantasy, and the resulting explosion was going to take me down as collateral damage. The emotional sting of his blatant favoritism was entirely eclipsed by the cold, harsh reality of impending legal ruin. I was standing on the deck of a sinking ship, and the captain was busy buying new furniture for the dining room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application and began photographing every single document. I captured clear, high-resolution images of the specific dates, the penalty amounts the county seals, and the final warning of the impending lien. I made sure the overhead lighting caught the embossed texture of the red envelopes. These images were my ammunition. These exact documents would become the physical instruments of my father's execution when the time came to face the wealthy neighbors he so desperately wanted to impress. I folded the papers back into their rough red envelopes and returned them to the chaotic stack inside the lower right drawer. I pushed the heavy wood shut, ensuring the metal latch engaged. I retrieved the small brass key to lock the mechanism and carefully placed the key back beneath the silver golf trophy on the bookshelf. I erased all physical evidence of my presence in the room. I straightened a leather coaster on the desk and smoothed out the carpet fibers where I had been standing. My hands were shaking, but my mind was operating with crystal clear precision. The panic had subsided, leaving behind a cold, calculating resolve. I could not just pack my bags and move to a nice apartment across town. If I ran away, the tax lien would drop, the mortgage would default, and my career would end. I was chained to this impending disaster. The only way to survive was to dismantle the threat from the inside. I reached for the brass doorknob to exit the office when the heavy sound of footsteps echoed on the hardwood stairs. Someone was walking up to the second floor. The heavy, steady tread did not belong to my mother. The confident, deliberate pace belonged to my father. He was heading straight down the hallway toward his private sanctuary. I quickly opened a random, unlocked filing cabinet drawer and pulled out a blank manila folder just as the office door swung open. My father stood in the threshold, his expression instantly darkening into a scowl. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. "I need my prior year W-2 tax form for a routine human resources audit at my firm," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and holding up the blank folder as a prop. I thought it might be in the family archives. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, searching my face for any sign of deception. "You know I do not like people rummaging through my private workspace," he reprimanded, stepping into the room and gesturing toward the door. "Get out. Find your own paperwork." I nodded submissively and walked past him, stepping out into the hallway. He closed the heavy oak door behind me, sealing himself back inside his fortress of lies. He thought he had successfully defended his territory, but his aggressive defensive posture only confirmed what I now knew to be true. He was terrified. He was running out of time and running out of stolen money. I walked back to my bedroom, knowing that tomorrow he would try to tighten the leash. The coming morning would bring a new battle, and I needed to be ready for his next move. We woke up the next morning before the sun crested the tree line. My eyes burned from a lack of sleep, but my mind operated with a cold, sharp clarity. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, buttoning my tailored blazer and adjusting the collar of my silk blouse. I was preparing for another grueling 10-hour shift at the accounting firm. I needed to project total professional competence. But the reflection staring back at me knew a dark, suffocating secret. The sprawling colonial house surrounding me was a hollow shell. It was a beautiful, carefully curated movie set teetering on the edge of a sheer cliff. And my father was the director, demanding we all keep smiling for the cameras while the ground crumbled beneath our feet. I picked up my leather briefcase and walked quietly down the stairs. The house was silent. The scent of expensive roasted coffee beans drifted from the kitchen, but I bypassed the coffee maker. I just wanted to get to my car. I wanted to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the fabricated wealth and breathe the crisp morning air. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out onto the porch. The dew was still wet on the manicured lawn, reflecting the pale morning light. The neon green landscaping from yesterday looked flawless, but my path to the driveway was blocked. My father was waiting for me. Richard Miller did not have a morning commute. His boutique logistics consulting firm had essentially ceased functioning years ago, but he maintained a strict morning routine to project the illusion of an active executive lifestyle. He stood between me and my sedan. He wore a crisp, pristine golf polo in a vibrant shade of azure blue. The fabric looked expensive, woven from high-end performance material. He held a thin manila folder in his right hand. His posture had shifted overnight. The faux paternal warmth he displayed during our living room meeting was gone. The genial, smiling patriarch had vanished, replaced by a cold, unyielding stranger. He stood with his feet planted wide, his shoulders squared, treating me not as a daughter, but as a hostile corporate acquisition. "Good morning, Verity," he said. His voice carried a flat, authoritative tone. "We need to finalize our conversation from last night before you leave for the office." I stopped walking and tightened my grip on the handle of my briefcase. "I have a client meeting at 9 o'clock, I replied, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I updated the automatic bank transfer this morning, just like you asked. The new amount will clear your account on the 1st of the month." He did not step aside. Instead, he extended his arm and pressed the manila folder against my chest, forcing me to take it. "Verbal agreements are not sufficient anymore," he stated, watching my eyes. "We need to formalize the arrangement. Open it." I flipped open the folder. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. It was a newly drafted tenant agreement. He had used a generic online template and filled in my name alongside his own. The document formally mandated the 30% rent hike, but he had added a series of strict, punitive clauses at the bottom. The contract stipulated severe late fees, mandatory contribution to household maintenance, and a clause requiring a 60-day notice if I intended to vacate the premises. It was a piece of amateur legal theater designed to intimidate me. "You want me to sign a lease for my childhood bedroom?" I asked, looking up from the paper. "I want you to learn vital responsibility," he countered, his tone dripping with condescension. "You live in a protected bubble, Verity. You earn a healthy salary, but you have no concept of the brutal economic realities operating outside these walls. The real world does not run on verbal promises. It runs on contracts. This is a lesson in self-reliance. I am doing this to prepare you for the harsh truths of adulthood." As he delivered his arrogant speech on self-reliance, Richard confidently reached up and adjusted the collar of his azure golf polo. He smoothed the expensive fabric with a practiced, elegant motion. The sheer, unmatched irony of that single gesture almost made me laugh out loud. I recognized that specific polo shirt. I knew the brand, and I knew the retail price was well over $200. My father had purchased that exact shirt just last week using the primary checking account, the same checking account where I deposited my monthly rent, the rent that was supposed to be paying the municipal property taxes. He was wearing stolen tax money on his back. He was lecturing me about the harsh economic realities of the real world while wearing a luxury garment purchased with funds he embezzled from his own daughter. He was treating me like a naive child, while I was the only person keeping the county tax assessor from seizing the very driveway we were standing on. "I need this signed by Friday at 5 o'clock, he continued, oblivious to the storm raging behind my eyes. "If you refuse to sign the tenant agreement, I will initiate formal eviction proceedings. I will serve you with a 30-day notice to vacate the family home. You can pack your bags and try your luck in the open real estate market." The threat hung in the cool morning air. He was using the terror of sudden homelessness to squeeze me into submission. The psychological tension tightened like a vice around my chest. But the terror he expected to see in my eyes was absent. Instead, I felt a deep, delicious wave of dramatic irony. He was threatening to evict me. He was standing on a property he had bankrupted, threatening to kick out the woman who held the deed to his financial survival. He was legally ignorant and blinded by his towering ego. He truly believed his historical ownership of the house gave him the ultimate authority, ignoring the factual reality that my name was anchored to the refinancing debt. If he tried to evict me, I could stop paying the bank and watch his entire world collapse in under 30 days. "Verity, stop being so difficult." The soft, complaining voice drifted from the porch stairs behind him. I looked over my father's shoulder. My mother, Cynthia, was standing on the brick steps holding a steaming ceramic mug of coffee. She wore a plush silk robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Your father stayed up late drafting that document to protect everyone," she said, taking a small sip from her mug. "We do so much for you. We provide a safe, beautiful environment. We maintain a certain standard of living that benefits you professionally. Asking for a formalized agreement is just standard procedure. You need to stop acting like a victim and show some gratitude." Cynthia nodded in agreement with her own statement, throwing her unwavering support behind my father's extortion. She was the perfect enabler. She smoothed over his cruelty with a veneer of maternal disappointment, making me the villain of the story. She prioritized the flawless image of her suburban castle over the mental and financial well-being of her own child. I looked back down at the printed contract. My father was pushing too hard. The sudden 30% rent hike was alarming, but this aggressive timeline was highly irregular. A formal lease and an eviction threat with a Friday deadline signaled a deep, frantic desperation. The unpaid property taxes had been compounding for 3 years. The county was sending red envelopes. But something else was driving this immediate hunger for cash. The rent increase was not just about covering the tax deficit. It was about Kevin. My golden brother had arrived home last night driving a leased $90,000 luxury vehicle he could not afford. He was playing the role of a successful founder, but he had no company. And tonight was our scheduled weekly family dinner. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping into place. My father needed my signature on this contract today because he needed my money to fund Kevin's next delusion tonight. I closed the manila folder and tucked it under my arm. "I will read over the terms and conditions today," I said, maintaining a calm, steady tone. "I will give you my final answer before the Friday deadline." Richard offered a curt, satisfied nod. He believed he had won. He believed the threat of eviction had successfully broken my spirit and forced me back into my designated role as the quiet, compliant funding source. "Do not disappoint me, Verity," he said, turning away to walk toward the house. I walked to my sedan, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I placed the fraudulent tenant agreement on the passenger seat and started the engine. As I reversed down the long circular driveway, I looked at the sprawling, beautiful colonial home through my rearview mirror. The pristine landscaping, the manicured hedges, the fresh paint. It was all a breathtaking lie. My father thought he was squeezing me for a few extra $100, but his aggressive maneuver had just handed me the clarity I needed. I knew Kevin was going to make a major announcement at the dinner table tonight. And I knew the municipal tax records in the home office were only a small piece of the larger financial puzzle. If I wanted to survive the coming storm, I needed to uncover the rest of the hidden ledger. I needed to dig into the digital dirt and discover exactly what my brother was planning to demand from me next. The atmosphere in our formal dining room that evening felt thicker than the humid summer air outside. My mother had spent the entire afternoon preparing a roasted beef tenderloin, served alongside buttered asparagus and miniature potatoes. The expensive sterling silver cutlery scraped lightly against the fine china, creating a rhythmic, metallic soundtrack to the underlying tension. My father sat at the head of the long table, behaving as if the hostile driveway confrontation from that morning had never occurred. He poured himself a glass of dark red wine, projecting the relaxed demeanor of a benevolent patriarch presiding over his loyal subjects. Kevin sat directly across from me. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, signaling that he was a man ready to get his hands dirty in the trenches of the corporate world. But his hands were perfectly smooth. They had never known a day of actual physical labor. My brother possessed a long history of pursuing imaginary careers. When he was 24, he declared himself a tech visionary and spent 9 months conceptualizing a social networking application that never produced a single line of actual code. At 27, he founded a boutique marketing agency that failed to secure a single paying client before quietly dissolving. He always had a grand vision. He always had a perfect excuse for why the universe conspired against his inevitable success. And he always required a fresh infusion of capital to fund his next delusion. Kevin cleared his throat, tapping his silver fork against the edge of his water glass to command the room's attention. I have gathered you all here tonight to share some incredibly exciting news, he announced, flashing a bright, polished smile. After months of rigorous market research and intense networking, I am finally ready to launch my new enterprise. My mother dropped her napkin onto her lap, her eyes wide with manufactured delight. "Oh, sweetheart, that is wonderful," she gushed, leaning forward. "Tell us everything." "I am entering the logistics and supply chain optimization sector," Kevin said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers together. "The current freight industry is operating on outdated legacy systems. My new company will disrupt the traditional supply routes using decentralized algorithms and synergistic tracking metrics. We are going to streamline middle-mile delivery frameworks for mid-sized retailers." I took a slow bite of my asparagus, chewing silently. The string of corporate buzzwords sounded like a random generated script from an online business seminar. He was stringing together high-level jargon without establishing a single, concrete operational mechanism. "It is a brilliant concept," my father proclaimed, raising his wineglass in a toast. "The logistics sector is ripe for innovation. A smart, agile founder can capture a significant market share if they move quickly." "What is the next step for the launch phase?" "That is the best part," Kevin replied, his smile widening. "I already have a preliminary verbal agreement with a major software developer to build the proprietary tracking platform. But to secure the contract and cover the initial operational overhead, I need to secure an immediate seed injection. I am looking to raise $50,000 by the end of the week." The number hung over the dining table heavy and suffocating. $50,000. My father nodded slowly, stroking his chin with profound gravity. "Seed capital is the lifeblood of any new venture," he stated, looking directly at me. "And the Miller family always backs its own. We protect our investments and we support our blood. We will find a way to make this happen." The strategy clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The fabricated tenant agreement my father shoved into my hands that morning was not just about covering his unpaid municipal taxes. The sudden demand for a 30% rent hike and the aggressive threat of eviction were designed to break my financial independence. He intended to squeeze my savings account dry and funnel those exact funds straight into my brother's empty pockets. "Do you have a printed prospectus?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely level and devoid of emotion. Kevin blinked, losing a fraction of his confident swagger. "A prospectus," he repeated. "A formal business plan," I clarified, setting my fork down on the porcelain plate. "If you are seeking a $50,000 capital investment, you must have documented financial projections. What is your anticipated monthly burn rate for the first 2 quarters? Have you secured any letters of intent from these mid-sized retailers you plan to service? Who is handling the commercial liability insurance for the freight contracts? The dining room went completely silent. My mother stared at me with a mixture of shock and deep disapproval. My father gripped the stem of his wineglass, his knuckles turning white. "Those are micro-level details," Verity Kevin fired back, his cheeks flushing a dark shade of pink. "You are getting bogged down in the administrative weeds. Founders operate on a macro level. I am the visionary, building the overarching architecture. I will hire an administrative assistant to handle the basic spreadsheets once the funding clears. You cannot hire an assistant if you do not understand your own overhead costs," I countered, refusing to break eye contact. $50,000 is a highly specific number. How did you calculate that exact figure? Are you purchasing physical server space or leasing a commercial warehouse? You mentioned software development, but what about the actual physical supply routes? Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You just do not grasp the modern tech landscape," he argued, adopting a defensive sneer. "The initial capital covers the digital infrastructure. We purchase the software architecture, and then we manage the asset depreciation. The financial strategy relies heavily on an aggressive schedule of amortization." He placed a heavy, unnatural emphasis on the third syllable, twisting the vowels until the term sounded like a rare medical disease. I physically winced, pressing my face into my white linen napkin to hide my reaction. He was trying to use the word amortization. It is a fundamental accounting principle detailing the process of gradually writing off the initial cost of an intangible asset over time. It was a basic freshman-level financial vocabulary word, and he could not even pronounce it correctly, let alone apply it accurately to a non-existent software platform. "Do not roll your eyes at me," Kevin snapped, his voice rising in pitch. His polished charm shattered, revealing the fragile, entitled core beneath. "You sit in a gray cubicle all day auditing other people's money because you lack the courage to build anything of your own. You are just bitter. You are jealous because I am taking a massive leap and creating a legacy, while you are pushing buttons on a calculator." "That is enough," Richard interrupted, slamming his hand down onto the mahogany table. The silverware jumped. He glared at me, his eyes narrowing with cold fury. "Your brother is sharing a monumental milestone with this family. He is showing initiative and bold leadership. You will not sit at this table and interrogate him like a hostile witness. You will show him the respect he deserves as an entrepreneur." I dabbed the corners of my mouth with my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. "I am not interrogating him," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly calm. "I am a certified public accountant. I evaluate business models for a living. I am simply asking the standard prerequisite questions that any legitimate bank or angel investor would require before handing over a single dollar." "Well, we are not a bank," Richard retorted, his tone dripping with absolute authority. "We are a family, and in this house, we believe in each other. We do not demand petty spreadsheets to prove our loyalty." I looked across the table at Kevin. He was breathing heavily, his face still flushed with defensive anger. He picked up his water glass with a trembling hand, trying to regain his composure. I did not say another word. I did not need to. The confrontation provided every piece of information I required. The fake business pitch was a desperate smokescreen. A man who mispronounces basic financial terms and lacks a single written document is not starting a disruptive tech company. A man does not demand an immediate $50,000 seed injection by the end of the week to build a digital platform. Software development requires structured milestone payments over many months. It does not require a sudden frantic lump sum of cash. Kevin was in trouble. He needed a specific amount of money, and he needed it fast. The manufactured urgency, the vague corporate jargon, the defensive rage when pressed for details. It was all the classic behavior of a man trying to cover a dangerous personal debt. My father was willing to drain my bank account to protect his golden boy from whatever disaster he had stumbled into. Richard was already drowning in 3 years of unpaid municipal property taxes, but he was still prioritizing Kevin's fabricated startup over the impending loss of our family home. The math simply did not align. If the county tax assessor was preparing to place a lien on the property, my father should be hoarding every available dollar to save the estate. Instead, he was acting like a man who believed he still had access to an invisible safety net. As I sat there watching my mother offer Kevin a comforting slice of buttered bread, the true severity of my situation crystallized in my mind. The red government envelopes locked in the home office drawer were only a symptom of the disease. There was a much larger structural failure hiding beneath the surface. My father was too arrogant to panic over the property taxes because he fundamentally believed the house still possessed untapped value. I needed to see the full structural picture. The local government tax records only showed what my father owed the municipality. I needed to see what he owed the banks. Tomorrow morning, I was going to use my professional credentials to access the National Credit Registry. I was going to pull a comprehensive deep-dive financial background check on the property deed. I knew the equity on the house should be pristine. I had spent 8 grueling years paying down the principal balance on the primary mortgage, ensuring the property gained solid, reliable value. But the frantic, desperate energy radiating from my father and my brother told a different story. The dinner concluded in heavy silence. I excused myself and walked upstairs to my bedroom, leaving them to scheme in the dining room. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. When the sun rose, I was going to hunt down the rest of the missing ledger, and I knew the truth waiting in those credit files would change my life forever. I arrived at my office in Morristown before the sun had fully risen. The commercial building was quiet, save for the low hum of the climate control system and the faint buzz of the fluorescent overhead lights. My workstation sat on the 14th floor overlooking a dense concrete grid of intersecting highways. This desk was my sanctuary. Here, I was not a disrespected daughter or a convenient funding source. I was a licensed professional. I commanded respect. I controlled the data. I logged into my secure terminal and placed my ceramic coffee cup next to the keyboard. I bypassed my usual corporate client portfolios and opened the National Property Registry database. As a credentialed auditor, I possessed legal clearance to pull comprehensive, deep-dive credit histories and title reports for any parcel of real estate in the state of New Jersey. I typed in our Somerset County address. The system processed the request for a few seconds before generating a dense, highly detailed financial dossier. I leaned in close to the monitor, letting my eyes scan the columns of black text and numerical figures. I needed to see the full structural picture of my father's hidden liabilities. The primary loan appeared first. I verified the outstanding principal balance. The figure matched my personal accounting ledger perfectly. I had spent 8 grueling years sending a substantial portion of my paycheck to the lending institution. The debt was shrinking steadily. Property values in our elite suburban enclave had surged over the past decade. According to the current market appraisal, the colonial house held robust, solid equity. I had built a valuable financial safety net through sheer discipline and endless overtime hours. I scrolled down the page expecting to see the clear title section. Instead, a secondary liability populated the screen. A bright red warning flag appeared next to a separate routing number. My heart skipped a beat. I highlighted the entry and clicked to expand the details. It was a revolving credit account attached directly to the property deed. A home equity line of credit. The banking industry refers to it as a HELOC. It functions like a giant credit card secured by the physical value of your house. If you fail to repay the borrowed funds, the bank seizes the real estate. The approved limit on this secondary mortgage was $100,000. I stared at the current balance column. The number staring back at me was exactly $100,000. The available credit was 0. The equity I spent 8 years building had been quietly drained dry. The safety net was gone. My hands started to shake. I gripped the edges of my desk to steady myself. A HELOC attached to a jointly financed property requires mandatory authorization from every single party listed on the original deed. The bank cannot legally disperse those funds without verifiable consent. I had never authorized a secondary loan. I had never spoken to a loan officer. I clicked a link to download the scanned origination documents from the lender portal. The multi-page contract materialized on my screen. I scrolled rapidly to the final signature page. There was my name, written in blue ink. But the handwriting was a clumsy, horrific imitation. The loops on the letters were slanted in the wrong direction. The sharp angles I typically used were rounded and sloppy. It was an amateur forgery. Someone had traced my signature onto a binding federal document. I did not need to guess the identity of the forger. My father's signature sat proudly on the primary borrower line, directly above mine. He had walked into a financial institution and actively stolen my identity. But a signature alone is insufficient to secure $100,000. The bank requires a licensed public notary to physically verify the identity of the signers and stamp the paperwork with an official government seal. I zoomed in on the bottom corner of the contract, a circular black stamp pressed over the forged ink. The notary name printed inside the seal belonged to William Bradley. A sharp, bitter taste flooded my mouth. William Bradley was not a random bank employee. He was a prominent local insurance broker and a highly visible regular at the Oak Ridge Country Club. He played 18 holes of golf with my father every single Sunday morning. They drank premium scotch together in the clubhouse lounge. My father had utilized a corrupt local buddy to rubber stamp a fraudulent loan application, bridging the gap between his towering ego and his empty bank account. The betrayal shifted in that exact moment. This was no longer a sad domestic dispute over toxic emotional manipulation or stolen rent payments. This was a literal federal crime. Wire fraud, identity theft, falsifying bank records. My father had crossed a bright red legal boundary and dragged me over the edge with him. I opened the transaction history for the depleted account. The money had not vanished in one single lump sum. It bled out through a series of calculated, targeted withdrawals over the course of 18 months. I recognized the corresponding dates. A $10,000 transfer matched the week my mother decided the kitchen required new, imported Italian marble countertops. A $5,000 draft aligned perfectly with an extravagant family vacation to a luxury resort in the Florida Keys, a trip I was told I could not attend because I needed to stay home and work. Then my eyes locked onto the largest, most aggressive cash withdrawal on the entire digital ledger. It was a single transfer for $35,000. I checked the specific timestamp attached to the transaction. It processed on a Tuesday afternoon exactly 2 months ago. I sat perfectly still, listening to the muted hum of the office ventilation system. I knew that exact date. It was my 28th birthday. A vivid, painful memory washed over me. I recalled returning to the Colonial House that evening after grinding through a punishing 12-hour shift at the firm. I was exhausted and hungry. My parents were sitting in the living room watching television. They did not host a dinner party for me. They did not buy a cake. My father handed me a thin, generic greeting card he purchased from the local pharmacy chain. I remembered turning the card over and seeing the barcode and the $3 price tag printed on the back. Inside the folded paper was a handwritten note from my mother and a $5 gift certificate to a chain coffee shop. They smiled and told me how proud they were of my independence. They told me I was so responsible they knew I did not need lavish gifts to feel loved. While I stood in that living room holding a piece of cheap pharmacy cardboard, my father was simultaneously draining $35,000 of my hard-earned home equity into his personal checking account. He smiled in my face while secretly robbing me blind. The sheer scale of the deception knocked the wind out of my lungs. I slumped back into my ergonomic office chair. The gravity of my situation was far worse than the unpaid property taxes. The local government was threatening to place a lien on the house due to the delinquent municipal levies. If the county seized the property, the primary mortgage would immediately default. The bank would liquidate the house at a fraction of its true value. The proceeds from a forced auction would cover the primary loan, but the secondary HELOC, the stolen $100,000, would remain entirely unpaid. Because my forged signature sat on that document, the secondary lender would hold me legally responsible for the massive shortfall. They would garnish my professional wages. They would sue me in civil court. My pristine accounting license would be suspended the moment the fraud investigation commenced. My prestigious career would evaporate. I was standing on a trap door, and my father had already pulled the lever. The urge to panic flared hot in my chest. A normal person would stand up, walk out of the office, and confront their family. A normal person would pack a suitcase and flee the toxic environment. But flight was no longer a viable option. If I ran away, the entire fragile house of cards would collapse on top of me. I stared at the timestamp of that birthday withdrawal until the numbers burned into my retinas. The initial shock receded, leaving behind an icy, focused rage. My father believed his golf club connections and his patriarchal authority made him untouchable. He believed he could use my identity as a blank check to fund his suburban delusions without consequence. He underestimated the woman he raised. He forced me to become an expert in data analysis to pay his bills. Now I was going to use those exact skills to build a guillotine. I closed the primary banking portal and opened a fresh, secure spreadsheet file. I needed to cross-reference every single fraudulent withdrawal with his corresponding luxury purchases. I needed to build an unbreakable mathematical chain of evidence. If I was going to survive this impending legal disaster, I had to sever my name from his crimes. And doing that required preparing a trap so tight he would never see the walls closing in until it was far too late. I drove back to Somerset County that evening, moving through the commuter traffic like a ghost. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and charcoal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles ached. The realization of the forged signature pulsed in my mind, keeping tempo with my racing heartbeat. My father had stolen my identity. He had hollowed out my financial future to fund his country club membership and buy my brother a luxury vehicle. When I pulled into the circular driveway, the house was dark. The carriage lights illuminated the pristine landscaping and the charcoal gray SUV parked near the garage. The manufactured perfection of the estate disgusted me. It felt like walking into a mausoleum. I unlocked the heavy mahogany door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside felt stagnant, thick with the scent of expensive room diffusers and hidden rot. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight up the carpeted staircase to my childhood bedroom. I closed the door, locking the brass deadbolt. I stood in the center of the pale yellow room, listening to the oppressive silence of the house. A profound, suffocating wave of claustrophobia crashed over me. I needed to leave. The urge to flee was not a rational thought. It was a visceral, biological mandate. I felt like a trapped animal desperate to chew off its own limb to escape a steel snare. I walked to my closet and pulled down a large, black canvas suitcase, throwing it onto the mattress. I unzipped the main compartment and began grabbing clothes from the hangers. Sweaters, blouses, slacks. I tossed them into the bag without bothering to fold the fabric. I opened my dresser drawers, grabbing handfuls of essentials. My breathing grew shallow and ragged. I wanted to pack my car, drive away in the dead of night, and never look back. I wanted to abandon them to their self-inflicted ruin. Let my father try to explain the unpaid municipal taxes to his wealthy neighbors. Let Kevin figure out how to cover his leased vehicle when the bank accounts dried up. They deserved to burn in the fire they had so carelessly started. I walked over to my wooden desk to gather my personal documents. My eyes landed on the heavy oak frame resting near my computer monitor. Inside the glass was my official certified public accountant credential. The document represented years of punishing late-night study sessions, sacrificed weekends, and grueling examinations. It was the physical manifestation of my independence. I picked up the heavy frame and tucked it carefully into the center of the suitcase, nesting it between two thick sweaters to protect the glass. I zipped the bag shut. The metallic sound of the zipper echoed in the quiet room. I grabbed the padded handle, ready to lift the luggage off the mattress and walk out the front door. But my feet refused to move. I stood frozen at the edge of the bed, staring down at the black canvas. The initial frantic rush of adrenaline began to recede. My clinical data analyst brain, the exact same intellectual machinery I use to dissect corporate portfolios, woke up and seized control of my nervous system. I let go of the suitcase handle and sat down on the edge of the mattress. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of laundry detergent from the bed sheets. I closed my eyes and allowed the raw mathematical projections to cascade through my mind. If I grabbed my keys and drove away tonight, I would initiate a devastating chain reaction. I would stop transferring my monthly funds into my father's checking account. Without my cash injection, the primary mortgage payment would bounce within 30 days. The lending institution would issue a formal notice of default. Meanwhile, the Somerset County tax assessor would officially drop the municipal lien onto the property deed because the 3-year deficit remained unresolved. The tax lien would instantly trigger the strict acceleration clause hidden within the fine print of the primary mortgage contract. The bank would demand immediate payment in full for the entire remaining balance of the house. When that demand went unmet, the foreclosure would commence. But the fallout would not stop at the property line. The real danger lurked inside the fraudulent secondary loan. When the house went to auction, the proceeds would likely cover the primary mortgage, but the $100,000 home equity line of credit would remain exposed. Because my forged signature sat on that secondary loan document, the bank would legally view me as a defaulting debtor. They would not pursue my father because he possessed 0 liquid assets. They would pursue the signer with the pristine credit score and the high-paying corporate salary. They would pursue me. The secondary lender would file a civil lawsuit to recover their lost funds. They would secure a court order to garnish my wages. The resulting financial collapse would inevitably force me into a personal bankruptcy proceeding. I opened my eyes and looked at the dark silhouette of the suitcase resting on my bed. The timeline was irrefutable. The moment a bankruptcy filing hit the public record, the state accounting board would receive an automated alert. The Ethical Oversight Committee would suspend my professional license pending a thorough investigation. A financial auditor who cannot manage their own portfolio is viewed as a severe liability. My prestigious firm would terminate my employment within hours to protect their corporate reputation. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made to ensure my autonomy would be wiped out. Running away was not an escape. It was professional suicide. My father had not just tied me to a sinking ship, he had handcuffed me to the anchor. I could not escape the blast radius by simply walking out the front door. Fleeing the battlefield meant surrendering my future to his crimes. A cold, rigid calm washed over my body, replacing the frantic urge to flee. The tears of betrayal I had shed earlier were gone. The emotional wounds inflicted by his favoritism and his deception no longer mattered. This was no longer a domestic dispute over unfair treatment. This was a battle for my very survival. I unzipped the main compartment of the black suitcase. I reached past the jumbled layers of silk blouses and wool sweaters. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool glass of the heavy oak frame. I pulled my certified public accountant credential out of the luggage. I walked slowly across the bedroom floor and placed the framed certificate precisely back onto the center of my desk. I adjusted the wooden edge until it sat perfectly parallel to my computer monitor. I traced my thumb over my printed name. I was not going to run. I was going to stay right here in this fabricated suburban castle. I was going to smile at the dinner table and drink tap water from a chipped mug while they sipped imported wine. I was going to play the role of the quiet, compliant daughter, funding their delusions for just a little while longer. But behind the scenes, I was going to systematically dismantle them. I was going to use my professional expertise to construct a trap so mathematically flawless that no high-priced lawyer or corrupt golfing buddy could ever unravel it. I would gather the forged documents, the hidden ledgers, and the red government envelopes. I would compile every single piece of damning evidence into an undeniable digital execution block. I began unpacking the rest of the suitcase, pulling the wrinkled clothes from the canvas bag and returning them to their hangers in the closet. The physical act of unpacking felt like a declaration of war. Every shirt I hung up cemented my resolve. I was shifting from a passive, suffering victim into a cold, active strategist. I pushed the empty luggage back onto the top shelf and closed the closet door. I turned toward my desk and booted up my laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark room once again. I needed to begin building the ultimate spreadsheet. But as I opened the auditing software, a soft knock sounded at my bedroom door. The knocking was gentle, almost hesitant. It was a stark contrast to my father's usual heavy-handed demands. The brass doorknob turned slowly, and the door swung open to reveal my mother standing in the dimly lit hallway. Cynthia wore a long cashmere cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She held a small, polished silver serving platter carrying a single cup of chamomile tea. Her face was set in an expression of deep, manufactured concern. I knew exactly what this late-night visit represented. My father had utilized aggressive threats in the driveway this morning and failed to secure my immediate submission. Now they were deploying the second phase of their manipulation strategy. The enabler was here to smooth over the rough edges and guilt me into compliance. I closed my laptop screen, prepared to face the emotional warfare she was about to unleash. My mother stepped into the room and closed the heavy bedroom door with a soft, quiet click. She carried a steaming porcelain cup of chamomile tea resting on an ornate antique silver serving platter. The polished metal gleamed under the warm glow of my bedside lamp. She wore her expensive cashmere cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders, projecting an aura of maternal concern that I knew was entirely fabricated. This was the second phase of the family offensive. When my father failed to crush my resistance with sheer brute force and ultimatums, my mother would arrive to administer the soft poison. She was the designated peacekeeper, a role that required her to twist reality until I felt guilty for trying to defend my own survival. "I brought you something warm to help you settle down," she murmured, placing the porcelain cup onto my nightstand. She did not set the silver platter down. Instead, she carried the heavy metal tray over to the edge of my mattress and sat gracefully. She reached into the deep pocket of her cardigan and retrieved a small, square microfiber cloth. Without asking for permission, she began rubbing the fabric in tight, rhythmic circles across the intricate floral engravings bordering the silver tray. "You caused quite a scene at the dining table tonight," she began, her tone light, but laced with sharp disappointment. "Your brother was trying to share his vision. He felt deeply humiliated when you started demanding spreadsheets and accounting projections like a hostile bank auditor." I sat in my desk chair, turning to face her. "I was not hostile," I replied, keeping my voice measured and calm. "I asked basic, fundamental questions. If he wants a seed investment, he needs to provide a verifiable plan. $50,000 is a significant sum of money." Cynthia sighed a long, weary breath, designed to make me feel like a difficult, petulant child. "You always focus on the rigid numbers, Verity. You see the world in cold columns and rows. Kevin is a creative spirit. He operates on a different frequency. He needs a little more help to find his footing and translate his brilliant ideas into a tangible reality." "He is 32 years old," I stated. "He does not need a little more help. He needs a job." The microfiber cloth paused for a fraction of a second before resuming its circular path across the silver. My mother pressed harder, polishing a small smudge near the center of the tray. "We have given you so much," she said, pivoting the narrative toward guilt. "We provided a safe, prestigious environment. We funded your college tuition so you could secure your current position. We maintain this beautiful estate so you have a sanctuary to return to every evening." Her words were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She conveniently ignored the undeniable fact that I was the one paying the primary mortgage. She rewrote our shared history, framing my indentured servitude as a generous gift. She grew up in a modest, middle-income neighborhood on the outskirts of the county. When she married Richard, she believed she was marrying into untouchable old money. When his logistics firm collapsed 8 years ago, her greatest fear was not starvation or homelessness. Her deepest, paralyzing terror was the prospect of social demotion. She could not bear the thought of losing her membership at the Oak Ridge Country Club or facing the pitying whispers of the wealthy housewives at the local charity luncheons. To prevent that social death, she happily offered me up as a sacrificial lamb. You have a lucrative career, she continued, her eyes fixed solely on the reflection in the polished metal. You have excess income. It is your sacred duty as a daughter to sacrifice for the greater good of this household. Your father is under immense pressure trying to keep everything afloat. If you sign the tenant lease and provide Kevin with the seed capital, we can all move forward peacefully. I watched her rub the silver tray. The metal shone like a mirror. She was not looking at me. She was staring directly into her own distorted reflection. She cared vastly more about the shiny, flawless surface of her life than the psychological and financial well-being of her own child. What happens if I do not have the cash, I asked, testing the boundaries of her delusion. What happens if I cannot fund his imaginary startup? Her polishing motions grew rigid and fast. We cannot afford to look weak in front of the neighbors, she whispered, her voice tightening with genuine anxiety. The local elite are hosting their annual summer gala next month. The entire country club board will attend. If Kevin does not launch his venture soon, people will start asking uncomfortable questions. If word spreads that our family is struggling, the social consequences will be devastating. We will become outcasts. The truth hung in the quiet bedroom, stripped of all pretense. It was never about teaching me financial responsibility. It was never about supporting Kevin's entrepreneurial dreams. It was solely about preserving the fragile, hollow facade of Somerset County prestige. She was willing to bankrupt me, to forge signatures on federal documents, and to risk severe municipal tax liens just to ensure she could hold her head high at a neighborhood cocktail party. Any lingering hope I held that my mother was an innocent victim of my father's financial tyranny evaporated in that precise moment. She was not a helpless bystander trapped in his web of lies. She was the co-director of the charade. She knew exactly what it cost to maintain the illusion, and she actively encouraged him to drain my future to pay the toll. I realized arguing with her was not just futile, it was highly dangerous. If I pushed back too hard, they might suspect I knew about the forged home equity line of credit. If they realized I was hunting for the truth, they would change the locks and block my access to the crucial financial records. I needed to keep them arrogant. I needed them to feel victorious and deeply complacent. You are right, I said, softening my posture and lowering my gaze to the floor. I am sorry. Cynthia stopped polishing. She looked up from the silver tray, a triumphant smile breaking across her carefully moisturized face. I have been stressed at work, I continued, feeding her the exact narrative she wanted to hear. The rent increase caught me off guard. I was projecting my own workplace anxiety onto Kevin during dinner. I will review the tenant agreement tomorrow. She let out a soft, satisfied breath. I knew you would understand, sweetheart, she cooed, standing up from the mattress. You have always been the reliable one. Get some rest. We can finalize the paperwork before the weekend. She carried the shining silver tray out of the room, closing the door gently behind her. She walked away, believing she had successfully manipulated me into total submission. She believed the crisis was averted and the suburban fantasy would continue uninterrupted. I stood up and walked over to my desk. The chamomile tea sat untouched on the nightstand, cooling rapidly. The encounter solidified my resolve into unbreakable iron. They were never going to stop extracting my resources. They would keep digging until my credit was destroyed and my professional license was revoked. To build the trap, I required uninterrupted time at the office to compile the data. I needed to ensure they did not bother me with further demands while I constructed my ultimate spreadsheet. I formulated a diversionary tactic. I opened a web browser and searched for generic retail employment applications. I downloaded printable forms for a local grocery store, a late-night diner, and a hardware shop. I printed the blank job applications on my personal printer. Tomorrow morning, I would leave these papers scattered casually on the kitchen counter. My father and my brother would find them. They would see the applications and assume I was frantically looking for a second minimum wage job to afford the exorbitant new rent and Kevin's seed money. The sight of me applying for menial labor would feed their towering egos. It would provide them with a profound sense of superiority and control. They would gloat over my supposed desperation. They would drop their guard entirely, leaving me free to weave the financial noose that would soon hang them all. I gathered the freshly printed papers, stacking them neatly on the edge of my desk. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The psychological warfare had officially commenced, and I was playing a game they did not even realize had begun. I laid down on my bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, knowing the impending morning would mark the beginning of their final week in this house. I woke up early on Wednesday morning, ensuring the house was still submerged in quiet shadows. I carried the printed job applications downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of stale champagne from 2 nights prior. I walked over to the dark granite island and placed the forms right next to the white scratch my brother had carved into the stone. I fanned the papers out, making sure the bold logos of the local grocery store, the 24-hour diner, and the neighborhood hardware shop were clearly visible. I retreated to the adjacent dining room, sitting in the corner, shadowed by the heavy velvet drapes. I waited. At 7 o'clock, heavy footsteps descended the staircase. My father walked into the kitchen, wearing his custom-tailored robe. He headed straight for the premium espresso machine, but stopped abruptly at the island. He picked up the stack of papers. Even from a distance, I saw a slow, satisfied grin spread across his face. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and dialed a number. A moment later, Kevin shuffled into the kitchen, yawning loudly and rubbing his eyes. "Look at this," Richard said, tapping the applications against the granite surface. "Your sister is applying to stock shelves and wait tables." Kevin leaned over, inspecting the documents. He let out a sharp bark of laughter. "You are kidding me. She is actually going to flip burgers to pay her rent? I told you she just needed a firm push into reality." "It is about breaking that stubborn independence," Richard replied, his voice thick with smug triumph. She thought she was untouchable, sitting in her corporate tower. Confronting her with the threat of eviction forced her to recognize who holds the real power in this household. She is bending the knee, Kevin. Once she secures a second shift, we will have your seed capital ready to deploy. They gloated over my fabricated misery. They soaked in the illusion of their dominance. My diversionary tactic functioned flawlessly. By feeding their towering egos, I ensured they would remain dangerously complacent. They would never suspect the quiet, obedient daughter was currently building a digital guillotine. I slipped out the side door, walked to my sedan, and drove toward Morristown. The auditing firm operated on a secure, closed-loop network. My dual-monitor workstation was equipped with proprietary forensic accounting software designed to unravel complex corporate embezzlement schemes. Today, I was deploying military-grade financial tools against my own blood. I opened a blank workbook. I named the file the Miller Ledger. The first phase required establishing the baseline truth. I imported 8 years of continuous banking statements directly from my personal accounts. I isolated every single mortgage payment I had ever routed to the primary lending institution. Row after row of undeniable proof materialized on the screen, demonstrating my sole ownership of the home equity. Beside that column, I imported the records of my monthly rent transfers. The cash I sent directly to my father's account. I cross-referenced those incoming rent deposits against his outgoing expenditures. The software algorithm highlighted the discrepancies in bright, glaring red. The cash earmarked for the Somerset County tax collector bypassed the municipal treasury entirely. The program mapped the diverted funds straight into payments for the Oak Ridge Country Club premium wine subscriptions and luxury car leases. The data formed a perfect, unbroken chain of theft. Next, I tackled the secondary loan. I uploaded the forged home equity line of credit contract. I tagged the fraudulent signature and the notarized seal provided by William Bradley. I mapped the corresponding depletion of the $100,000 credit line, linking each predatory withdrawal to my parents' lavish lifestyle upgrades. I highlighted the $35,000 transfer initiated on my 28th birthday, locking the cell in a thick, bold border. The physical act of organizing the deception brought a profound sense of clarity. The anxiety that had plagued me for days evaporated. I was no longer a victim reacting to their cruelty. I was an architect constructing an inescapable reality. The final missing puzzle piece was my brother's imaginary logistics enterprise. Kevin claimed he needed $50,000 to secure a software developer, but my father had practically demanded the cash within a few days. Authentic tech startups do not operate on a 3-day emergency funding cycle. Desperate men running from dangerous creditors operate on that schedule. Kevin spent his days lounging by the country club pool, claiming he was networking with elite venture capitalists. But growing up, I remembered his intense fixation on collegiate sports. He never missed a game. He memorized player statistics, injury reports, and weather conditions. He frequently paced the living room screaming at the television when a team failed to cover the expected point spread. He referred to his bookie as a private wealth consultant. I opened a secure investigative terminal often used to track offshore shell corporations. I ran a deep search on the banking routing numbers Kevin had previously used to receive his so-called consulting fees. The forensic footprint did not lead to reputable software developers or supply chain vendors. The digital trail crossed international borders, ending in a cluster of accounts registered in the Caribbean. The software parsed the routing data, unmasking the recipient. The accounts belonged to an offshore sports betting syndicate known for catering to high-stakes gamblers who had exhausted their legal credit limits. Kevin was not founding a tech company. He was drowning in a $50,000 gambling deficit. The syndicate was demanding immediate payment. That explained his frantic energy, his flushed face when interrogated, and my father's sudden, ruthless push to evict me if I did not sign the punitive lease. Richard was willing to drain my savings and risk total financial ruin to bail his golden son out of an illicit gambling debt. The sheer scale of their combined depravity removed any lingering hesitation from my mind. I was going to burn their social standing to the ground. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. The satisfying, rhythmic click-clack echoed in my quiet office space. Each keystroke felt like a nail driven into their coffin. I formatted the spreadsheet for maximum visual impact. I generated stark, irrefutable pie charts demonstrating Kevin's reckless waste. I built clear, unarguable bar graphs exposing my father's systematic theft. I embedded the high-resolution photographs of the red municipal tax delinquency envelopes directly into the final summary tab. I highlighted the entire master grid. I navigated to the security settings and enabled a highly encrypted password protection protocol. I locked every single cell, making the data immutable and mathematically bulletproof. The files could not be altered, deleted, or denied. The digital weapon was fully forged. It sat in the shadows of my hard drive, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My smartphone vibrated on the desk, pulling my attention away from the glowing monitors. A new text message illuminated the lock screen. It was from my father. "I am hosting a catered dinner party tomorrow evening," the message read. 12 of our most important neighbors are attending. I expect you to be there. Wear something appropriate and look grateful. We are going to finalize Kevin's seed funding in front of the community to show them how this family operates. I stared at the glowing text. He was actually going to do it. His towering arrogance was driving him to stage a public ambush. He intended to trap me in front of the wealthy Somerset County elite, using their collective peer pressure to force me into writing the check for his son's gambling debt. He wanted to project the ultimate image of a powerful patriarch directing his wealth. He was providing me with the exact audience I needed. He was constructing the stage for his own public execution. I picked up the phone and typed a single word in reply. Understood. I turned back to my monitors and smiled. The trap was set. The invitations were sent. Tomorrow night, the neighbors would arrive expecting roasted lamb and fine wine. Instead, they were going to witness the brutal, mathematical dismantling of the Miller family facade. Thursday afternoon sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of my bedroom window, casting long, pale shadows across the hardwood floor. The day of the grand exhibition had finally arrived. Somerset County dinner parties are never casual social gatherings. They are high-stakes diplomatic summits where fortunes are measured by the vintage of the wine and the brand of the catering company. My father had invited 12 of the most influential residents in our elite neighborhood. The guest list included the Homeowners Association president, a prominent regional bank manager, and an affluent commercial real estate developer. These were the exact individuals my father intended to leverage. He wanted to project an aura of total financial supremacy to secure local social capital and build a network for my brother's phantom logistics enterprise. I sat at my wooden desk, holding my smartphone. I needed to verify the current status of the fraudulent secondary loan before the evening began. I opened the secure banking application and navigated to the home equity line of credit. The digital page loaded, revealing a stark, undeniable truth. A new pending transaction hovered at the very top of the ledger. It was a charge for $4,500, routed to a premier event catering firm based in Princeton. I dragged my eyes down to the available credit balance. The number sitting at the bottom of the screen was 0. My father had literally scraped the very last dregs of the stolen equity to pay for the roasted lamb and the imported appetizers. The $100,000 limit was entirely exhausted. There was no more hidden cash. There was no secret reserve fund to pay the impending municipal tax lien or the compounding mortgage interest. The financial well was bone dry. He had drained the final drops of blood from this house to fund a single evening of fabricated glory. He was hosting a lavish celebration on the deck of a sinking ship. I locked my phone and stood up. The muffled sounds of heavy diesel engines drifted through the window glass. I walked over to the glass panes and looked down at the circular driveway. A large white commercial catering van was attempting to navigate the tight curve near the front porch. The driver reversed the heavy vehicle, angling the rear doors toward the kitchen entrance to unload the chafing dishes and the silver serving trays. The heavy dual tires rolled backward, missing the paved asphalt edge. The thick rubber treads drove directly over a meticulously curated bed of vibrant purple petunias. My mother had spent the entire morning kneeling in the humid dirt, planting those expensive flowers to ensure the front entrance looked immaculate for the wealthy guests. I watched the heavy van tires flatten the delicate purple petals, grinding the pristine blossoms deep into the dark soil. The destruction was swift and brutal. The kitchen door swung open, and Cynthia stepped out onto the porch. She wore a tailored beige cocktail dress, her hair styled into a flawless, elegant sweep. She froze, staring at the ruined flower bed, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. I could see the genuine fury flashing across her face. The crushed petunias were a physical manifestation of her loss of control. Her beautiful, curated world was being trampled by the very machinery required to maintain their grand illusion. Before she could scold the careless driver, a figure jogged past the iron front gates. It was the wife of the Homeowners Association president, wearing expensive athletic gear and a bright visor. Cynthia snapped her head toward the street. The genuine fury vanished from her face in a fraction of a second. She instantly pasted on a radiant, welcoming smile, waving cheerfully at the passing neighbor. She forced herself to ignore the ugly, ruined dirt at her feet, prioritizing the perception of the affluent jogger over her own ruined property. That single interaction encapsulated the entire Miller family pathology. They would happily watch their own foundation be crushed into the mud, as long as the neighbors believed they were thriving. I turned away from the window and walked toward my closet. I selected a modest dark navy dress and a pair of simple black heels. I needed to look like the quiet, obedient daughter they expected me to be. I dressed methodically, securing my hair and checking my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who had accepted her fate. Heavy footsteps approached my bedroom door. The brass knob turned, and my father stepped into the room without knocking. Richard looked like a millionaire featured in a financial magazine. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. The scent of premium citrus cologne preceded him. He stood in the doorway, radiating an overwhelming sense of arrogant authority. He believed tonight was his crowning achievement. He believed he was about to secure his golden son's future and cement his legacy among the local elite. "You look acceptable," he noted, running his eyes over my modest dress. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt, keeping my expression carefully neutral. "The caterers have arrived," I replied. "Yes, they have," Richard said, stepping further into the room. His voice dropped into a low, commanding register. "Listen to me very closely, Verity. Tonight is an incredibly important milestone for this family. We are hosting the people who shape the economic landscape of this county. Your brother is going to present his logistics concept to individuals who possess the power to make him a very wealthy man." "I understand," I said softly. He took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "I do not just want you to understand. I want you to perform. Your attitude recently has been sullen and combative. You have questioned my authority and disrespected your brother's ambition. That behavior ends tonight. When you walk down those stairs, you will smile. You will engage in polite conversation. You will look grateful for the highly privileged life I have generously provided for you." He was demanding my compliance as a mandatory tax for my existence. He was ordering me to sit at his table and validate his stolen wealth. "When the time comes to discuss Kevin's seed funding, you will nod, and you will show the room that we are a united front," Richard continued, his eyes narrowing with a sharp warning glare. "You will prove to those people that the Miller family protects its own. Do I make myself clear?" He was laying the groundwork for the public ambush. He was confirming my suspicion. He planned to corner me in front of the bank manager and the real estate developer, using their intense social gravity to crush my resistance. He expected me to write the $50,000 check to save face. He expected me to fund a sports betting syndicate disguised as a tech startup just to maintain the illusion of our domestic harmony. "You have made your expectations incredibly clear," I answered, looking directly into his eyes. "I will bring my laptop down to the dining room. I have some financial documents prepared for the discussion." Richard offered a curt, satisfied nod. He heard the word financial and assumed I was referring to a transfer confirmation or a summary of my liquid savings. He believed I had folded under the pressure of the impending eviction and the sheer weight of his patriarchal dominance. "Good," he said, adjusting his silk tie with a crisp, confident motion. "Come downstairs in 10 minutes. The guests are arriving and I want my entire family waiting to greet them." He turned and walked out of the bedroom, his leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He walked away, a proud man, entirely oblivious to the trap he had just locked himself inside. I walked over to my desk and picked up my slim silver laptop. The machine felt heavy in my hands. It contained the ultimate spreadsheet, the locked, immutable ledger detailing every single forged signature, every stolen tax dollar, and every empty lie this family had ever told. I slid the computer into a black leather portfolio case. The doorbell rang downstairs, chiming a melodic, expensive tune. The heavy front door opened, followed immediately by a chorus of cheerful, affluent greetings. The house began to fill with the sounds of Somerset County elite, the high-pitched laughter of wealthy wives, the deep, resonant voices of powerful men discussing stock portfolios, and the sharp clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The scent of roasted lamb and expensive imported cheeses drifted up the staircase, masking the scent of the rotting foundation. The physical stage for my father's grand extortion was perfectly set. The tension in the house was a living, breathing entity wrapping around the pristine banisters and settling into the velvet drapes. The oblivious guests were taking their seats, preparing for a luxurious evening of networking and self-congratulation. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. I gripped the leather portfolio case containing my digital weapon. I walked out of my childhood bedroom and began my descent down the grand staircase, ready to take my seat at the table. The time for silent suffering was over. The execution was about to begin. I walked down the curved wooden staircase, gripping the smooth mahogany banister. The air on the ground floor grew significantly warmer, thick with the heavy, savory aroma of roasted garlic, rosemary, and reduced balsamic glaze. The dining room ahead of me was a brilliantly illuminated theater of fabricated success. 12 high-backed chairs upholstered in pale cream fabric surrounded the extended dining table. Silver flatware polished to a flawless mirror finish reflected the warm golden glow of the overhead crystal chandelier. Elaborate floral centerpieces featuring imported white orchids and cascading green vines anchored the center of the table, masking the scent of the rotting foundation beneath our feet. I took my assigned seat near the foot of the long table, placing my black leather portfolio carefully against the leg of my chair. To my immediate left sat Mr. Caldwell, a senior executive at a prominent regional wealth management firm. His tailored charcoal suit jacket draped perfectly over his shoulders, subtly signaling decades of comfortable affluence. Across from him sat Mrs. Montgomery, the notoriously strict president of our local homeowners association. She wore a heavy string of authentic pearls and scrutinized the catered appetizers with an approving, respectful nod. These were individuals who measured a person's human worth entirely by their property acreage and their diverse investment portfolios. Cynthia sat at the opposite end of the long table. My mother performed the role of the gracious, affluent hostess with terrifying perfection. She directed the hired catering staff with subtle, elegant flicks of her wrist, ensuring every single wine glass remained full to the brim. She laughed softly at Mr. Caldwell's dry corporate jokes, projecting a flawless image of serene domestic bliss. Looking at her radiant, welcoming smile, no one in the room would ever suspect she had spent the entire morning suppressing a furious, blinding rage over a ruined flower bed. She was deeply, profoundly committed to the illusion. Kevin occupied a prime, highly visible seat near the center of the action. He sat right beside a prominent commercial real estate developer, leaning in close to discuss current market trends with feigned expertise. Kevin nodded thoughtfully, running a hand along his jawline, pretending he actually possessed the necessary capital to care about commercial zoning laws or fluctuating interest rates. He wore a brand-new designer sports coat, undoubtedly purchased on a high-limit credit card that my father would eventually expect me to pay off. And then there was Richard. My father dominated the head of the table. He was entirely in his element. He steered the overlapping conversations with practiced, effortless ease, moving smoothly from local township politics to private golf course conditions. He projected the commanding aura of a man who had conquered the professional world. He was the benevolent, wise king, holding court inside his grand, impenetrable fortress. Inside my dark leather case, resting just inches from my feet, my slim laptop held the cold, hard mathematics of our grim reality. I sat silently watching the professional catering staff serve thick, juicy slices of prime beef tenderloin paired with delicate roasted vegetables. I knew exactly how that exquisite meat was purchased. I knew my father had drained the final agonizing pennies from the fraudulent secondary loan just to fund the single meal sitting on our fine porcelain plates. The brazen hypocrisy of the lavish evening settled deep into my bones like a winter chill. The wealthy guests consumed the stolen feast with total, blissful ignorance. They complimented the tender quality of the beef and praised the complex, oaky notes of the expensive vintage wine. Every single compliment inflated my father's towering, fragile ego. He absorbed their praise like a starving man discovering water in a desert. He craved their social validation so desperately, he was willing to commit federal wire fraud and risk my entire future to obtain it. As the rich main course concluded, the silent catering staff moved swiftly through the room, clearing the empty plates and pouring a fresh round of an imported Bordeaux. The dark ruby liquid filled the heavy crystal glasses, catching the ambient chandelier light. The conversational hum around the table began to naturally settle as the guests leaned back in their chairs. Richard picked up his crystal glass, holding it delicately by the long, thin stem. He reached over and tapped his silver butter knife against the delicate rim. The clear, sharp, musical chime echoed through the dining room, instantly commanding the unwavering attention of every single guest. All eyes immediately turned toward the head of the table. Richard stood up slowly, unbuttoning his suit jacket to project a relaxed but dominant posture. He looked around the room, making deliberate, meaningful eye contact with the wealthy neighbors he so desperately wanted to impress. I want to thank all of you for gracing our home tonight. Richard began, his voice projecting with smooth, resonant authority. We are surrounded by good, trusted friends, excellent food, and truly wonderful company. But important nights like this also make a man reflect on the long, arduous journey required to get here. Building a secure life in a highly demanding community like Somerset County is not a simple undertaking, he continued, pacing slightly behind his tall chair. It demands a specific, rare caliber of grit. It requires grueling, long hours, countless sleepless nights, and an unwavering, steadfast commitment to a vision. When I started my boutique logistics consulting firm decades ago, I did not have a comfortable safety net to catch me if I fell. I built my enterprise from the ground up through sheer willpower and relentless self-reliance. He raised his glass slightly, gesturing to the ornate crown molding and the expensive landscape artwork lining the dining room walls. I provided this beautiful castle for my family because I firmly believe hard work should yield tangible rewards. We do not ask for government handouts. We earn our keep. We pull our own weight. That is the fundamental, defining philosophy of this household. I sat perfectly still, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. The soaring audacity of his speech was almost physically suffocating. He was standing inside a house actively facing aggressive municipal tax foreclosure. He was lecturing a room full of legitimate millionaires about self-reliance while secretly surviving on the monthly salary of his 28-year-old daughter. He was a financial parasite masquerading as a self-made corporate titan. Richard let his inspiring words settle over the captive audience before his facial expression shifted into an indulgent, patronizing smirk. He turned his gaze directly down the length of the mahogany table, locking his eyes onto mine. Of course, teaching those vital old-school values to the next younger generation presents a unique set of modern challenges, he said, his tone shifting into a light, mocking cadence. We all know how incredibly difficult it is to instill a strong, durable work ethic into millennials today. They grew up expecting shiny participation trophies and instant gratification from a screen. They want the luxury lifestyle without putting in the grueling, back-breaking hours to actually earn it. Several of the older guests chuckled softly, nodding their heads in shared generational agreement. Mr. Caldwell murmured his quiet assent, taking a slow, appreciative sip of his dark wine. Take my daughter Verity, for example, Richard continued, gesturing toward me with his free hand. She has a very comfortable corporate job right now. But living in a prestigious, highly insulated estate like this one can easily make a young professional far too comfortable. That is exactly why Cynthia and I firmly believe she needs to learn the true, uncompromising value of $1. We charge her a strict monthly rent to live under our roof. We demand she pays her own way, because real, lasting character is forged through strict financial responsibility, not endless familial handouts. The psychological strike was precise and deeply calculated. He was publicly framing my indentured servitude as a highly generous, wise parenting strategy. He was openly taking credit for my financial discipline while simultaneously mocking me for being allegedly dependent on his charity. He painted himself as the strict but incredibly loving provider, and painted me as the spoiled, naive child requiring a firm, guiding hand. He desperately wanted the important guests to view me as a subordinate, so I would feel too deeply shamed to resist his impending public financial demand. To genuine self-reliance and the sweet rewards of hard work, Richard proclaimed, raising his crystal glass high above his head. To hard work, the 12 wealthy neighbors echoed in enthusiastic unison. They raised their glasses toward the center of the table. The sharp, clear clinking of fine crystal rang out across the dining room, a bright, melodic sound filling the warm air. They drank the expensive Bordeaux eagerly, toasting to a fabricated empire funded entirely by stolen home equity and unpaid municipal taxes. The toxic psychological arrogance radiating from my father reached its absolute zenith. He took a long, deeply satisfied drink of his wine, savoring the taste of his perceived social victory. He believed he had perfectly manipulated the narrative in his favor. He felt completely untouchable, basking in the warm, golden glow of high society approval. As the polite applause faded and the guests lowered their glasses, Richard did not sit back down. He remained standing tall at the head of the table. He turned his attention away from me and smiled warmly at his golden son. The belittling speech was merely the opening act. The trap was fully primed, the audience was captivated, and he was finally ready to spring the jaws shut. Richard remained standing at the head of the long mahogany table. The polite applause from his previous toast had faded, but he held the attention of every guest in the dining room. He turned his gaze away from me and beamed at his son. Kevin straightened his posture, adjusting the lapels of his new designer sports coat. Our community thrives on innovation. Richard declared, his voice ringing clear over the soft ambient hum of the chandelier. We are surrounded by pioneers in finance and real estate tonight. That is why I am so incredibly proud to announce that Kevin is officially launching his own enterprise in the supply chain logistics sector. He has identified critical inefficiencies in modern freight distribution, and he is building a proprietary platform to revolutionize the industry. The affluent neighbors offered a chorus of approving murmurs. Mr. Caldwell, the wealth management executive, nodded thoughtfully, resting his elbows on the pristine white tablecloth. In the upper echelons of Somerset County society, having a child launch a tech startup was practically a required vanity metric. It signaled that your offspring were not just inheriting wealth, but creating it. The guests did not ask for a business plan or a revenue model. They simply accepted the grand narrative because it fit their curated worldview. Kevin soaked in their admiration. He offered a humble, practiced smile, looking down at his plate before raising his eyes to meet the admiring gazes of the commercial real estate developer and the Homeowners Association president. It has been a long, grueling process of market research and software architecture development, Kevin said, adopting a tone of weary but determined perseverance. But the preliminary data is undeniable. The market is hungry for a streamlined digital solution, and we are positioned to capture a significant share of the regional freight traffic within our first fiscal year. It sounded like a rehearsed pitch from a low-budget corporate training video. He strung the empty buzzwords together with effortless charm, masking the fact that his so-called enterprise was actually an offshore sports betting syndicate debt. Richard beamed with paternal pride. He walked around the edge of the table and placed a heavy, supportive hand on Kevin's shoulder. My son has secured serious interest from major regional retailers, Richard told the captive audience. He is ready to move into the final operational phase. But as any seasoned investor in this room knows, true success requires an initial infusion of seed capital. You need skin in the game. You need early believers who trust the vision enough to back it financially. Mrs. Montgomery took a delicate sip of her wine, her pearls gleaming in the warm light. Families should always be the first investors, she stated firmly. It shows the market that the founder has a solid, reliable foundation. When my nephew launched his medical device company, my husband and I gladly provided the initial funding. It is simply what families do to protect their legacy. Richard pointed a finger at Mrs. Montgomery, his face lighting up with triumphant validation. Exactly, he said. That is the exact philosophy of the Miller household. We do not beg outside venture capitalists for our initial seed money. We back our own blood. We prove our faith through tangible financial commitment. He removed his hand from Kevin's shoulder and slowly walked down the length of the dining table. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of his leather dress shoes. He stopped directly behind my chair. I could smell the sharp citrus notes of his expensive cologne and the rich, oaky scent of his wine breath. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. That brings me to the second reason we gathered tonight. Richard said, projecting his voice so every person in the room could hear clearly. We are combining my earlier lesson on millennial financial responsibility with a real-world opportunity. Verity has enjoyed a very sheltered, very lucrative career managing numbers for other people. She has built a healthy personal savings account while living under the protective umbrella of this estate. It is time for her to take a bold step into the real world. The air in the dining room grew thick and still. The guests turned their expectant faces toward me. The trap was springing shut. Verity, your brother requires $50,000 in seed capital by the end of the week to finalize his software development contracts. Richard announced, his tone shifting into a firm, uncompromising directive. As a lesson in true familial duty and high-level investment strategy, I am asking you to provide that initial funding tonight. You will write him a check from your personal savings. It is time you proved you understand the true value of contributing to this family. The brazen public demand echoed off the formal dining room walls. $50,000. He said the number casually, as if he were asking me to cover the cost of a modest lunch. To the millionaires seated around the table, $50,000 was a trivial sum, a polite gesture of goodwill. They did not know it represented my entire liquid life savings. They did not know my father was actively bankrupting the house and facing an impending municipal tax foreclosure. I looked across the table. Kevin leaned back in his upholstered chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He flashed a smug, utterly entitled smirk. He slowly picked up his crystal glass, raising it in a mock salute before taking a slow, victorious sip of his imported wine. He was reveling in my perceived defeat. He believed his offshore gambling debt was about to be erased by his quiet, obedient sister. My mother chimed in from the far end of the table, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "It is such a wonderful opportunity for you to be part of something groundbreaking, Verity," she cooed. "You will be a founding investor. We are all just so proud of the synergy in this family." The psychological pressure in the room was immense. Richard had weaponized social shame with terrifying precision. He chose this exact venue because he knew I despised public confrontation. He surrounded me with the most judgmental, status-obsessed individuals in the county. If I refused his demand, I would instantly become the villain of the evening. I would look like a jealous, tight-fisted, ungrateful daughter publicly humiliating her visionary brother and her generous father in front of their esteemed peers. In their eyes, refusing to write the check would be a catastrophic breach of suburban etiquette. Mr. Caldwell offered a warm, encouraging smile. "It is a smart tax move, Verity," he advised gently. "Capital losses on startup investments can offset your corporate income brackets. You should listen to your father. He knows how to build lasting wealth." I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. My pulse, which should have been racing in sheer panic, was remarkably slow and steady. The terror my father expected to provoke did not materialize. He thought he had backed me into a dark, inescapable corner. He thought the intense social gravity of the wealthy neighbors would crush my spirit and force me to surrender my financial autonomy. Instead, he had unwittingly handed me the ultimate gift. I had spent days trying to figure out how to expose his crimes without looking like a vindictive child. If I simply handed him the spreadsheet in private, he would deny the data scream about his patriarchal authority and continue his web of lies. I needed neutral, objective witnesses. I needed an audience that valued financial truth above emotional manipulation. Richard had gathered the local bank manager, the homeowners association president, and a commercial developer in one room. These were people who understood the severe legal ramifications of forged notary stamps, defaulted mortgages, and municipal tax liens. These were people who would instantly recognize federal wire fraud. My father had built the stage, installed the lighting, and invited the audience. He had constructed the perfect, inescapable public forum for his own execution. "I am waiting for your answer." Verity, Richard said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. The polite veneer was slipping, revealing the desperate, demanding dictator underneath. "Will you support your brother's enterprise, or will you embarrass yourself in front of our guests?" I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the scent of roasted meat and expensive wine. I turned my head slightly, looking up at the man who had stolen my identity, drained my equity, and threatened to evict me from my own property. "I would be honored to discuss Kevin's financial enterprise," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady across the quiet room. "I just need to review the underlying numbers with the group first." I leaned down toward the floor, extending my hand toward the leg of my chair. My fingers brushed the smooth, cool material of my black leather portfolio case. I grasped the handle and pulled the bag up onto my lap. I unzipped the main compartment, the metallic sound cutting through the thick silence. I reached inside and pulled out my slim, silver laptop, placing it directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. The guests watched me with mild curiosity, expecting me to pull out a checkbook or a simple bank transfer application. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly to see what I was retrieving from the leather bag. My mother frowned her flawless hostess smile, faltering for a fraction of a second. She did not like deviations from her carefully planned scripts. Richard remained standing behind my chair, his presence a heavy, looming shadow. He radiated impatient authority, expecting swift compliance. But as the silver lid of the laptop hinged open, casting a bright blue glow across the crystal glasses and the silver cutlery, the atmosphere in the room fundamentally shifted. The smug, victorious smirk on Kevin's face froze. He set his wine glass down on the table, the heavy base hitting the wood with a dull thud. I pressed the power button, authenticating my login sequence with a swift keystroke. The machine woke up, connecting seamlessly to the dining room smart television mounted on the far wall. I was not going to argue with my father. I was not going to debate the merits of family loyalty or defend my personal savings. I was simply going to show the wealthy elite of Somerset County exactly who they were eating dinner with tonight. I rested my hands on the keyboard, ready to unleash the master ledger. I stood up from my chair. My movements were slow, deliberate, and completely devoid of the panic my father had so arrogantly anticipated. I reached toward the pristine white tablecloth, grasping the cool aluminum chassis of my silver laptop. I retrieved a small wireless casting device from my pocket, plugging the unit directly into the side port of my machine. The dining room featured a massive 70-inch smart television mounted flush against the far wall, displaying a serene digital painting of a European countryside. I bypassed the decorative artwork, linking my computer straight to the primary display feed. The television screen blinked, shifting from the peaceful landscape to a stark, brilliant white grid of data. The sudden burst of bright fluorescent light illuminated the shocked, confused faces of our affluent guests. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, squinting at the towering columns of numbers. Mrs. Montgomery lowered her wine glass, her brow furrowing in deep aristocratic confusion. My mother Cynthia stiffened her flawless hostess smile, freezing into a rigid mask of sudden terror. She recognized the software interface. You requested a formal public review of the logistics investment, I stated, my voice carrying crisp, unwavering authority across the silent space. You brought these esteemed individuals here to witness a lesson in familial loyalty and self-reliance. As a licensed professional accounting auditor, I require absolute, verifiable transparency before deploying any capital. Let us thoroughly examine the proposed technology startup. I tapped the touchpad, clicking the first labeled tab. A vibrant, detailed bar graph populated the large wall display alongside rows of highlighted banking transfers. My brother claims he requires an immediate $50,000 seed injection to secure exclusive software developers. I explained, turning my body to face the bewildered audience. He pitched a revolutionary supply chain platform to you tonight. However, my forensic auditing tools paint a vastly different, incredibly grim portrait. I dragged my cursor over a cluster of specific routing numbers, magnifying the text so the elderly neighbors could read the digits clearly. These accounts do not belong to regional retailers or domestic technology vendors. I continued delivering the raw facts with surgical precision. I traced these specific destination markers across complex international borders. They terminate at a private holding firm located deep in the Caribbean, a corporation explicitly registered as an offshore, high-stakes sports betting syndicate. I looked directly at my brother. Kevin slumped downward, his arrogant, entitled smirk vanishing instantly. His skin drained of all color, leaving him looking like a terrified, hollow shell. He opened his mouth to protest, to offer one of his usual slick excuses, but his vocal cords failed him. He sat paralyzed, exposed before the very people he had tried to swindle. He is not building a disruptive freight platform, I informed the room. He is currently drowning in a massive illicit gambling deficit. The overseas syndicate issued a final aggressive demand for payment by this coming Friday. That is the true destination for your proposed venture capital. He needed my savings to save his own skin from dangerous international creditors. A collective, genuine gasp rippled through the seated millionaires. The prominent commercial real estate developer who had been nodding along with Kevin's pitch earlier now looked utterly repulsed. He realized he had been sitting next to a degenerate gambler attempting a clumsy con job. The elite community abhorred public scandal, but they possessed a profound, deep-seated respect for objective, raw data. The numbers proved the fraud beyond a shadow of a doubt. My father lunged forward, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Shut that screen off immediately," Richard commanded, his voice cracking with sudden, frantic terror. He reached across the table, knocking over an empty water goblet. "This is a private, domestic matter. You are humiliating this family. Turn it off right now, Verity. We are discussing financial responsibility." I countered, holding my ground and ignoring his booming demands. "You chose this public venue. We must conclude the curriculum you started." I navigated to the second tab, labeled Primary Estate Ledger. The massive screen refreshed, displaying 96 consecutive months of time-stamped banking transfers originating directly from my personal checking account and terminating at the regional lending institution. 8 years ago, this beautiful property faced imminent catastrophic foreclosure, I informed the captivated room. To prevent total bankruptcy, I personally co-signed the refinancing agreement. I have paid the principal mortgage every single month since that terrible day. The monthly rent my father demanded earlier tonight was not a contribution to our household upkeep. It was a fabricated extortion fee designed to pad his empty pockets. I am the legal equity holder of this house. Richard staggered backward, colliding heavily with the edge of his high-backed chair. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally among his wealthy peers. He sought a sympathetic gaze from the bank manager or the homeowners association president. He found only cold, disgusted stares. His grand, impenetrable fortress was collapsing into dust before his very eyes. But the most crucial lesson involves the hidden liabilities I announced, clicking the final, ultimate tab. The spreadsheet revealed the scanned secondary loan contract. I magnified the bottom section of the legal document, blowing up the signature line and the black notary seal until they dominated the 70-inch display. This is a home equity line of credit for $100,000. I explained, methodically charting the destruction. It was opened exactly 18 months ago, secretly draining the property value I spent nearly a decade building. Please carefully observe the primary borrower's signature. It is a clumsy amateur forgery. I never authorized this massive debt. My identity was stolen to secure this cash. I directed a digital laser pointer at the black circle stamped directly over the fake ink. Furthermore, the public notary who verified this fraudulent transaction is William Bradley. I know many of you play golf with him at the Oak Ridge Country Club. He is a prominent local insurance broker. He conspired with my father to commit federal wire fraud, falsifying official government documents. The revelation of William Bradley's name sent a shockwave through the guests. Mr. Caldwell gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Discovering a peer was complicit in a felony shattered their insulated reality. "Where did those stolen funds go?" I asked the paralyzed room rhetorically. I scrolled down, bringing up the itemized withdrawal history. They purchased luxury leased vehicles. They paid exclusive country club membership dues. They funded vacations I was not allowed to attend. And precisely 4 days ago, a final draft for $4,500 cleared the remaining balance, completely exhausting the account limit. I gestured toward the half-eaten roasted beef tenderloin sitting on the fine porcelain plates. That final withdrawal paid the Princeton Catering Company for the exquisite meal you are currently consuming. My father exhausted a fraudulent loan to buy your social approval tonight while secretly facing a catastrophic municipal tax foreclosure. He has not paid the property taxes in 3 years. The execution was flawlessly complete. I closed the silver laptop lid, extinguishing the bright data projection. The dining room plunged back into the warm, dim glow of the crystal chandelier. Absolute, horrifying silence descended upon the expansive space. No one moved a single muscle. No one spoke a single word. The wealthy guests sat frozen in their upholstered chairs, processing the staggering, undeniable scale of the documented deception. The only sound in the entire sprawling house was the soft, consistent hum of my laptop's internal cooling fan working steadily to lower the processor temperature. The dramatic climax had peaked, leaving a massive crater of ruined reputations in its destructive wake. The pristine illusion of Somerset County royalty was permanently shattered into jagged, irreparable shards. My father stood trembling at the head of the table, stripped of his arrogant armor and exposed as a common, pathetic criminal. The truth was out, but the immediate social fallout among the elite neighbors was about to trigger an explosive, highly unpredictable chain reaction. A dense, suffocating quiet descended upon the dining room, replacing the previously vibrant atmosphere of high society networking. The only audible noise remaining in the expansive space was the steady mechanical whir of my laptop cooling fan. I had just presented an unarguable mathematical autopsy of my father's fabricated empire. The 12 wealthy guests remained entirely frozen in their high-backed upholstered chairs. They stared blankly at the dark television screen, struggling to process the staggering magnitude of the deception they had just witnessed. In the elite suburban enclaves of New Jersey, financial ruin is not merely viewed as a personal misfortune. It is treated as a highly contagious terminal disease. The prominent residents of Somerset County spend their entire lives carefully insulating themselves from the ugly realities of debt and legal jeopardy. Sitting at a dining table with a man who actively committed federal wire fraud and forged official bank documents was their absolute worst nightmare. The pristine air suddenly smelled of impending indictments and public scandal. Kevin attempted to break the paralyzing tension. My older brother had coasted through his entire 32 years of existence, relying on a polished, effortless charm to navigate out of difficult situations. Whenever he failed a college exam or wrecked a vehicle, he simply deployed a charismatic smile and fabricated a witty excuse. He believed he could charm his way out of a digital execution. He forced a hollow, desperate chuckle that echoed awkwardly across the porcelain plates. "Wow, Verity," he said, his voice cracking sharply in the middle of the sentence. "That is quite the elaborate presentation. Is this some kind of avant-garde performance art piece? You really went all out for this bizarre practical joke." He looked around the table desperately, seeking a sympathetic smile or a shared laugh from the captive audience. He found absolutely nothing. Mr. Caldwell, the senior wealth management executive, stared at Kevin with an expression of profound, unadulterated revulsion. As a man who managed legitimate multi-million-dollar investment portfolios, Mr. Caldwell recognized objective banking data when he saw it. He recognized the official routing numbers, the authentic transaction codes, and the unmistakable digital signature of a major regional lending institution. He knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my presentation was not a prank. He was staring at a degenerate gambler who had just attempted to swindle the neighborhood elite. Kevin's fabricated smile melted away, leaving his face pale and slick with cold sweat. He sank lower into his seat, physically shrinking under the crushing weight of their collective disgust. His legendary charm had finally collided with a concrete wall of undeniable facts, and his charm shattered into a million useless pieces. My father tried to salvage the burning wreckage. Richard gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning bone white as he attempted to assert his usual, dominant patriarchal authority. He opened his mouth to deliver a commanding defense, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. "This is all a massive misunderstanding," Richard stammered, his normally smooth, resonant voice trembling with raw panic. "Those documents are incorrect. It is a clerical error from the municipal office. I can explain everything to you. My daughter is simply confused about the internal household accounting structures." He was drowning. He was trying to argue with time-stamped transfers and verified bank logos, using nothing but his fragile, shattered ego. The wealthy neighbors did not say a word. They simply watched him flail. I was not finished. A digital presentation is highly effective, but I needed to deliver a tangible, physical blow to completely sever their social lifeline. I reached down into my black leather portfolio case resting on the floor. My fingers grasped the thick, chaotic stack of unopened mail I had retrieved from his locked office drawer earlier that week. I pulled the thick stack of premium stock paper out of the bag and tossed it directly onto the center of the dining table. The heavy envelopes slid across the pristine white linen cloth, coming to a sudden stop right next to the elaborate floral centerpiece. The bright, aggressive red ink stamped across the official government warnings contrasted violently with the elegant silver flatware. Those are the physical municipal tax delinquency notices, I announced, ensuring my voice remained cold and clinical. They document 3 consecutive years of unpaid property taxes. The final envelope sitting on the very top of that pile is the formal declaration of an impending municipal lien. My father has financially bankrupted this estate. The county tax assessor is preparing to seize this property. Mrs. Montgomery, the notoriously strict president of the Homeowners Association, leaned forward slightly. She adjusted her authentic pearl necklace, her eyes locking onto the bright red government seals. As the leader of the local neighborhood committee, she understood exactly what a municipal tax foreclosure meant for the community. It meant a highly public, highly embarrassing auction. It meant property values dropping on our pristine street. Her earlier admiration for my father's supposed self-reliance instantly transformed into deep, furious contempt. The social destruction was now total and absolute. The guests realized they were not just attending a dinner party hosted by a fraud. They were sitting inside a house that legally belonged to the local government. The wealthiest neighbor in attendance was Mr. Kensington. He managed a prominent commercial bank branch in the neighboring wealthy district. He had spent the entire evening quietly observing the dynamics of our family. He had built his legitimate fortune by identifying bad investments and cutting his losses immediately. He recognized a toxic, catastrophic liability sitting directly at the head of the table. Mr. Kensington did not say a single word. He calmly picked up his linen napkin and wiped the corners of his mouth. He reached out and quietly set down a half-eaten crab cake appetizer onto his fine porcelain plate. The soft clinking sound of his fork hitting the ceramic was deafening in the silent room. He stood up from his upholstered chair, pushing it backward with a smooth, deliberate motion. He did not look at my father. He did not offer a polite farewell or invent a convenient excuse. He simply turned his back on the disgraced patriarch and walked briskly out of the formal dining room. The heavy mahogany front door opened and closed, signaling his permanent departure. Mr. Kensington's silent exit broke the invisible dam. The remaining affluent guests simultaneously realized they needed to evacuate the premises before the stench of financial ruin permanently attached itself to their own pristine reputations. Mr. Caldwell stood up hastily, bumping his knee against the heavy wooden table leg. "Look at the time," he muttered, addressing no one in particular. "My wife is expecting a call from our daughter. We really must be heading home." It was a clumsy, awkward excuse, but nobody cared. The wealthy wives grabbed their designer evening bags, abandoning their half-finished glasses of imported Bordeaux. The influential men buttoned their tailored suit jackets, avoiding all eye contact with my father. They moved as a single synchronized herd, driven by the primal suburban instinct to flee from poverty and scandal. "Thank you for the meal," Mrs. Montgomery said, her tone dripping with pure ice as she walked past my mother. "I will be convening an emergency meeting with the neighborhood board tomorrow morning regarding the status of this property." My mother, Cynthia, stood frozen near the kitchen threshold. Her flawless beige cocktail dress suddenly looked ridiculous. Her carefully constructed universe was collapsing in real time. Her entire identity was tied to the approval of the women currently sprinting out of her front door. She knew she would never be invited to another charity luncheon. She knew her membership at the country club would be quietly revoked. The affluent society she had sacrificed my financial future to impress was now discarding her like spoiled garbage. Within 90 seconds, the grand dining room was completely emptied of our prestigious guests. The sounds of luxury sedans starting in the driveway and accelerating quickly down the street echoed through the open windows. They were running away as fast as their expensive engines would allow. The lavish, catered dinner party was over. The crystal chandelier still cast its warm, golden glow over the long table, but the illusion of Somerset County royalty had evaporated, leaving behind a grim, desolate reality. My father stood alone at the head of the table. His face was entirely drained of color, his skin taking on a sickly gray pallor. His shoulders slumped forward, entirely stripped of his commanding posture. He looked exactly like the broke, desperate man he had been 8 years ago, before I signed the refinancing documents to save him. Kevin remained seated, staring blankly at the red municipal envelopes scattered across the white tablecloth. His gambling debt was due on Friday, and his secret funding source had just publicly detonated. I remained standing near the foot of the table, my hands resting lightly on the cool metal of my closed laptop. I had delivered the ultimate factual execution. I had shattered their fraudulent facade using the very audience they had weaponized against me. But the evening was not quite finished. The social devastation was complete, but the legal and physical separation remained. I reached back into my black leather portfolio case to retrieve the final document. The neighborhood guests had fled the blast radius, but my family still needed to face the severe, realistic consequences of their financial parasitism. The heavy front door clicked shut for the final time. The silence in the dining room was heavy and suffocating. Richard stared at the empty upholstered chairs where his influential neighbors had sat just moments ago. The harsh reality of his social destruction was slowly sinking into his mind. The color returned to his face, but it was not the flush of healthy pride. It was the dark crimson shade of rising panic and deep, furious desperation. He turned toward me, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. He took a heavy step forward, his leather shoes thudding against the hardwood floor. "What have you done to me?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "You destroyed decades of my hard work tonight. You humiliated me in front of the most important people in Somerset County. You ruined my reputation in this town." I stood my ground, refusing to step backward. "I did not destroy anything," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level and clinical. "I simply illuminated the destruction you already caused. You built a fragile house of cards using my forged signature and stolen tax payments. The wind just finally caught up with you." My mother collapsed into one of the empty dining chairs, burying her face in her hands. She began to weep softly, her tears ruining her flawless makeup and staining her beige cocktail dress. "How could you do this to your own family?" she sobbed aloud. "Where are we supposed to go? How will we ever show our faces at the country club again?" She was still mourning her social standing. Even now, facing total financial ruin and impending legal disaster, her primary concern was the judgment of the neighborhood elite. Her priorities were so fundamentally warped that she felt genuine sorrow for her reputation, rather than remorse for the exploitation of her daughter. I reached into my black leather portfolio case and pulled out a thick manila folder. I placed it onto the dining table, sliding it across the white linen cloth until it rested directly in front of my father. "I did not just come downstairs to present a spreadsheet tonight," I told him. "I spent my entire afternoon executing a legal survival strategy." Richard stared at the folder, refusing to open it. I reached over and flipped the cover open for him, revealing the formal legal documents printed on official bank letterhead inside. When I discovered the forged home equity line of credit yesterday, I immediately contacted the primary lending institution and their fraud department. I explained, detailing the precise administrative steps. I provided them with undeniable proof that my signature was falsified. I submitted my true identification credentials and requested a full internal audit of the secondary loan origination file. Because federal wire fraud was committed to secure that secondary loan, the bank has officially frozen all connected accounts. Richard looked down at the dense legal text, his eyes darting frantically across the page. They are initiating an immediate forced liquidation sale of this property. I continued mapping out his exact punishment. To recover the stolen funds and clear my name from your criminal activity, the bank is seizing the estate. The house will be auctioned off within the current fiscal quarter. The proceeds will settle the primary mortgage and offset the fraudulent secondary debt you accumulated. But the bank does not allow occupants to remain inside a property during a hostile fraud liquidation. I added, turning to the next page in the folder. That specific document is a formal eviction mandate. Because neither you nor Kevin are the legal equity owners, and because you are complicit in the financial delinquency, you are officially classified as non-paying hostile occupants. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. Kevin shot up from his chair, knocking his crystal wine glass over. The dark red Bordeaux spilled across the white tablecloth, looking like a fresh, weeping wound. "You cannot kick us out," he shouted, his voice cracking in sheer desperation. "Where am I supposed to go? I have a business to launch. I need my seed capital right now." "You do not have a business, Kevin," I replied, looking at my older brother with cold finality. "You owe $50,000 to an offshore sports betting syndicate. Your dangerous creditors expect payment by Friday. You will have to figure out how to settle your own gambling debts without using my personal savings account as your safety net." As I spoke, a bright beam of white light swept across the dining room wall. The harsh glare illuminated the painted crown molding and the expensive landscape artwork. The low, heavy rumble of a commercial diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards, drowning out the quiet hum of the crystal chandelier. Kevin ran to the front window, pulling back the heavy velvet drapes. A large, flatbed tow truck was backing into our circular driveway. The amber warning lights flashed rhythmically, casting rotating shadows across the pristine front lawn. A man in a high-visibility vest stepped out of the heavy truck cab, carrying a thick metal chain. "What is happening out there?" Kevin asked, pressing his hands against the cold window pane. "Why is there a tow truck in our driveway?" "Your new luxury vehicle was leased using the home equity as underlying collateral," I informed him, standing near the head of the table. "When you and Dad walked into that dealership, you proved your financial stability by pointing to the towering value of this estate. But the bank flagged that equity as fraudulent this afternoon. When the financial accounts were frozen, the dealership was immediately notified that their collateral was non-existent. They are repossessing the vehicle right now." Kevin watched in silent horror as the tow truck operator attached the heavy metal hooks to the front axle of his brand new charcoal gray SUV. The hydraulic winch began to whine, pulling the expensive machine up the steep steel ramp. The ultimate symbol of his fabricated success was being dragged away into the dark night. His golden boy status was officially revoked. He had no luxury car, no seed funding, and a dangerous international gambling debt looming over his head. Richard sank deep into his high-backed chair, his posture entirely deflated. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded a severe rent hike just yesterday was gone. He looked old, tired, and profoundly broken. He stared blindly at the eviction notice, his hands resting motionless on the ruined tablecloth. The undeniable reality of his impending homelessness and his impending criminal investigation weighed him down like heavy iron chains. He had traded his daughter's future for a fleeting illusion, and now he was left to pay the ultimate price alone. My work here was finished. I had surgically dismantled their parasitic hold on my life. I picked up my silver laptop and slid it back into my leather portfolio case. I zipped the bag shut, the metallic sound ringing with satisfying finality. I walked out of the formal dining room, leaving them surrounded by cold, roasted beef, spilled wine, and harsh legal truths. I walked through the quiet hallway and entered the kitchen. The imported dark granite island gleamed under the recessed ceiling lights. My mother had polished the stone surface to perfection earlier that afternoon, desperately trying to hide the ugly white scratch Kevin had carelessly gouged into the center. I reached into my tailored coat pocket and retrieved my heavy brass house key. I held the cold metal in the palm of my hand for a brief, silent moment. This small object represented 8 grueling years of financial suffocation. It represented countless skipped meals, ruined credit anxiety, and unearned guilt. It was the physical anchor binding me to their endless deception. I lowered my hand and dropped the key onto the granite counter. The heavy brass hit the stone with a sharp, definitive clack. I placed the metal key directly next to the deep white scratch. It was a fitting final monument to their careless entitlement and their ultimate spectacular downfall. They had damaged the foundation of our family, and now they would inherit the ruins. I turned my back on the pristine kitchen and walked out the side door. The cool night air hit my face, bringing the fresh, clean scent of pine trees and damp soil. The tow truck was just pulling out of the driveway, carrying the luxury vehicle away down the dark suburban street. The flashing amber lights faded into the distance. I walked to my modest, reliable sedan, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I placed my leather portfolio on the passenger side, securing the digital ledger that had saved my life. I started the engine and drove away from the Somerset County estate. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I did not need to see the sprawling colonial house ever again. My ledger was finely balanced. My pristine professional license was secure. My future belonged entirely to me. I drove into the quiet darkness, leaving them with nothing but their empty pride and the severe, undeniable consequences of their own making. Drive through the winding, tree-lined streets of any affluent American suburb, and you will see the physical manifestation of a cultural promise. You will see pristine colonial homes, perfectly manicured lawns, and luxury vehicles gleaming under the soft glow of carriage lights. We are conditioned to look at these sprawling estates and see the absolute pinnacle of success. We inherently believe that within those walls, traditional family structures are thriving, grounded in mutual respect, shared ambition, and unconditional love. But what happens when the foundation of that American dream is built entirely on exploitation? What happens when the people entrusted to guide and protect you view your success merely as an agricultural resource to be harvested? The story of the Miller family forces us to look past the velvet drapes. It challenges us to confront an incredibly uncomfortable truth about parenting responsibility and the invisible ledgers we keep hidden. In the relentless pursuit of projecting a specific social image, parents easily fall into the trap of assigning rigid, lifelong roles to their children. We frequently hear the comforting myth that parents treat all their offspring equally. Yet the reality of the traditional family dynamic often betrays this sentiment. Fairness is frequently the first casualty of parental ego. Within these pressured environments, a golden child is often crowned. This individual reflects the parent's own unfulfilled desires or mirrors their preferred idealized self-image. Consequently, this child is shielded from all accountability. Their mediocre efforts are celebrated as unrecognized genius, and their failures are universally blamed on an unyielding world. By blindly funding their delusions, parents believe they are demonstrating unwavering support. In truth, they are cultivating a crippling entitlement. They are raising an individual entirely incapable of surviving the actual world, ensuring their eventual and spectacular ruin. And then, inevitably, there is the strong child, the capable one who works the grueling 60-hour weeks, pays their own way, and navigates the overwhelming complexities of adulthood without a safety net. In modern American culture, we heavily romanticize concepts like resilience, grit, and independence. But within a fractured family structure, these virtues are quickly and ruthlessly weaponized. The strong child's independence is no longer viewed as a personal achievement to be celebrated. It becomes a convenient, exploitable utility. Parents relying on this child to shoulder the burdens they are too irresponsible to carry themselves is a profound failure of emotional awareness. They call it family loyalty when they need a mortgage paid, and they frame it as tough love when demanding extortionate rent. The lack of basic fairness in this dynamic is staggering. Parenting should fundamentally be about preparing children for the future, offering long-term guidance that builds character. It should never involve consuming one child's hard-earned future to silently subsidize the past mistakes of another. True family responsibility requires a level of emotional integrity that is startlingly absent in status-obsessed cultures. Honesty is not merely telling the truth when asked a direct question. It is actively living in reality. When parents construct a hollow facade to impress their affluent neighbors, they force their children to become supporting actors in an exhausting theatrical production. The child who sees the truth, the one managing the complex spreadsheets and auditing the empty bank accounts, is burdened with a suffocating silence. They are expected to smile politely while their own equity is quietly auctioned off to maintain a shimmering illusion. This dynamic gives rise to a silent, insidious epidemic, the parentification of the child. When the adults in the room are driven by narcissism, pride, and status anxiety, the responsible child is forced into the vacuum of leadership. They become the emotional caretakers and financial safety nets, suppressing their own needs because the fragile family system demands perpetual compliance. The tragedy of the parentified child is that they are traded in for a ledger of heavy duties they never signed up for. They are praised for being mature, but that maturity is actually a trauma response. It is the survival mechanism of a child who realized early on that if they did not steer the sinking ship, the entire family would crash into the rocks. As we navigate these complex psychological waters, we must examine the stories that shape us. If you have ever felt the crushing weight of being the designated strong one, if you have ever sat at a formal dining table feeling like a complete stranger among your own blood, or if you have had to draw a painful line in the sand to protect your future, you are not alone. These are the powerful, unspoken narratives we explore every week. If you appreciate honest explorations of family dynamics, psychological boundaries, and the satisfying pursuit of cold, hard justice, I invite you to subscribe and follow Luke Vengeance. We bring you the gripping tales that polite society tries so desperately to sweep under the rug. Conventional American wisdom preaches that family is a sacred, unbreakable bond. From a young age, we are inundated with the narrative that blood is thicker than water. Society dictates that you must sacrifice endlessly for the people who raised you, forgive every transgression, and that walking away from your parents is the ultimate unforgivable sin. We are taught to endure, to compromise, and to preserve the traditional family unit at all costs, under the guise of duty and unconditional love. But here is a philosophical truth that shatters that conventional paradigm. Sometimes unconditional loyalty to your family is a suicide pact. We are taught that establishing rigid boundaries is an act of selfishness, but unconditional love should never equate to providing unconditional access to your resources, your sanity, or your identity. The most profound act of self-care, and ironically, the most authentic act of familial love, is often allowing the fabricated facade to collapse entirely. By cutting the financial safety net, you force the parasites to finally stand on their own 2 feet. You strip away the enabling mechanisms keeping them stagnant. Walking away is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate assertion of human dignity. As the catering vans pull away into the darkness and neighborhood gossip begins to swirl over manicured lawns, we are left to wonder what actually remains when the grand dining rooms finally empty. A house is just wood, glass, and an adjustable mortgage rate. It is the truth spoken within its walls that makes it a home. Think about the roles assigned in your own family. Think about the unspoken expectations resting heavy on your shoulders right now. Are you building a life of your own design, or are you simply funding someone else's illusion? Love is a gift freely given, but respect is a currency that must be meticulously earned. The moment you recognize your own inherent value, the ledger is finally balanced, and you realize that true freedom sometimes requires burning the castle down.